Good evening. It is 7:02 p.m. on Monday, August 3rd, 2020, and I call to order this regular meeting of the Richfield School Board. Attending this evening's virtual board meeting are board members Paula Cole, Christine Malik, Tim Paulus, Allegra Smishek, and I am Crystal Brackey. Board member Peter Tensing is unable to attend tonight's meeting. We are also so happy to be joined by Superintendent Unowski and many district staff members who you will be able to hear from later in the agenda. This meeting is taking place virtually as allowed by Minnesota State Statute 13D.021 in light of the peacetime state of emergency declared by Governor Walz due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to make sure that I publicly share upfront that it is likely that our next meeting on Monday, August 17th, will actually have an in-person option for board members, staff, and public. And we are going to continue to have a virtual option for board members, staff, and public. So we are finalizing those details, but absolutely are aiming to ensure that we have a consistent approach across all of our district work, from our student instructional program to our board meetings, that enables people to participate in a way that feels safe and right for them. So with that, of course, we also want to start by sharing Richfield Public Schools' mission statement, that we strive to inspire and empower each individual to learn, grow, and excel, and just how important it is for us to keep that at the center of our meeting this evening as we're talking about some really important topics and looking ahead to the 2020-2021 school year. So thanks to those of you who are watching this meeting live or in the future on YouTube. We really appreciate you for being with us. And with that, we are going to move to our first item of business this evening, which is to approve the agenda before us. And as approval of the agenda is a routine business item, I'm not going to individually call on board members for questions or comments, but rather just pause and do an open ask if there are any comments or questions related to tonight's agenda. Okay, seeing and hearing none. Is anyone prepared to move the agenda as presented?
I will move the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. Christine Malik, as our board clerk, will conduct the roll call vote for this and all other action items this evening.
Okay, so we'll start with Ms. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Paulus.
Aye.
Ms. Smishek.
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Chair Brackey.
Aye. The agenda is approved. So we now move into the information and proposals non-action items section of the agenda. And I just want to note here that there will be opportunity for public comment at our August 17th board meeting. So anyone who is interested in participating in that meeting can contact me to discuss the different options that will exist for addressing the board at that time. And we will make sure that that information is available on the website in advance as well. The superintendent update tonight contains 3 really important items for discussion. So I will now turn things right over to Superintendent Unowski.
All right, thank you, Chair Brackey. So we are going to be talking about, in order, a fall planning update, a summer school update, and then also a school resource officer recommendation. For those listening, we're going to be having an open conversation about the planning process and where we are in terms of planning for launching school in the fall. We are not recommending or making any decisions today, but that will be a public sharing and announcement by August 17th. To put that in perspective, there are districts that have already announced plans. There are districts that are announcing plans next week. And then there are districts announcing plans as late as approximately the 24th or the week of the 24th of August. So we are launching a survey which has actually gone out just today and are really aggressively pursuing information and voice as we continue our fall planning. And so with that, I'm waiting now for Scott to pop up play to hear myself in double.
Superintendent Unowski here to talk to you about planning for fall 2020. On Thursday, the governor shared the plan for a safe return to school and school programming for the upcoming school year. Tonight, I will update you on our Richfield work and our next steps to make sure that we are fully prepared for our students and staff to arrive. In June, all schools were asked to prepare for 3 possible learning models: distance learning, in-person learning, with distance learning available for all of those opting to stay at home, and a hybrid model, including a mix of in-person and distance learning for all students. Again, still providing all distance programming for those opting to stay at home. The governor further clarified expectations to 5 possible options based on the current infection rate in Hennepin County. In addition to distance, in-person, and hybrid, we also need to be ready to provide different options for elementary students from our secondary students, prioritizing elementary student presence in school. All through the summer, we have been working together, over 80 of us, in teams planning for all of these models. A core team, including leaders of 15 teams examining and planning for our best learning options. Each of those leaders had their own planning team, with a wide range of members from bargaining units and representation across our district. It involved all the instructional and operational components of our school, and our teams have been working towards providing our students and families the most effective student learning environment and activity programs in a structured, safe, both at school and distance environment. A little more about distance learning. First, it's important to note that distance learning will be offered as a choice to all students and families. Distance learning will occur regardless of in-person or hybrid programming. It is also important to discuss the ways that distance learning will be different and better from the spring. As superintendent, I am very proud of the work our staff did this past spring. All that work from spring was planned and implemented in 8 days and on very short notice. This year, we have spent all summer with our team members planning for improved distance programming. New distance learning will have all students in live interaction with their teachers, small group instruction occurring more often and in more classes, and we will also still be providing recorded options in cases where students need to learn and have their learning occur at different times. In person means our district striving towards 50% capacity, or half the amount of students they're able to fill a room and a building. Also with social distancing, regular cleaning, added hand washing, hand sanitizer, along with face masks, PPE, or face shields for everyone. With current rules, Richfield classrooms can accommodate at least 17 students social distance, and buses right now could accommodate 23. One thing to note is these numbers continue to evolve, have changed over the past month, and we anticipate continuing to change as time goes by. As with all areas, we will be working with the state recommendations and guidelines. And to be clear, the state is also requiring some of the same things that we are planning for in distancing, cleaning, PPE, masks, 50% capacity, along with a wide range of other structural supports to ensure the safest possible environment. A hybrid program adds the greatest complexity. The all students in person model, again, while still offering distance learning for those choosing, occurs if the COVID-19 case rate is between 0 and 9 cases per 10,000 residents of Hennepin County. Distance for all model occurs in a case rate of 50 or more COVID cases per 10,000 residents of Hennepin County. But between 10 and 49 cases per 10,000, there are 3 hybrid type models. 10 to 19 cases means in-person for elementary and hybrid secondary. 20 to 29 means hybrid for all. And 30 to 49 means hybrid elementary and distance learning for all. Based on infection rates, prioritizing elementary students creates a wider range of options to consider, and honestly, 3 different types of hybrid models. We are surveying families and staff to gather information so that we can get the best possible information on how to finalize our plans. While I will describe general hybrid options tonight, our survey gets much more specific detail and choice in gathering their feedback. We're asking for individual information by student and by family about if they want their students in school and how often. Our goal is to have 100% survey participation from our students, families, and staff so that we can plan programming, transportation, and staffing. It also allows us to consider the plans of our surrounding districts and provides time to consult with experts. Our goal is to bring a final school start recommendation to the board August 17th. Some might wonder why we wait for 3 weeks to finalize. We believe that it's best for students to be in school if possible. Our state guidance suggests that monitoring infection rates is the best way to decide. Our current data is from July 18th. Based on the timing of the governor announcement, We will have full family and staff input along with more current, updated case rate data and know how to best start the school year in the coming weeks. For those wanting decisions earlier, I want to share that given the governor's plan for our state, we are working to be set up to use all models depending on current case rates, even if we begin in hybrid, which is what the data today suggests. The model can and will shift as case rates change. I want to remind, however, that if a family wants distance learning, they can plan for that model and stay in it throughout the year. That makes the survey extremely important. It helps us plan for food, transportation, support learning models, and learning location preferences. So again, I want to repeat some of the main points tonight. We are a district that will follow state guidelines to the best of our ability. Given all of the data right now, if the year were to start, we would launch a full hybrid program. We will examine the plans of surrounding districts. We will gather input from all staff and families, and we will bring back in the superintendent report, August 17th, our plan to start the school year. Remember, however, changing case rates mean that we may not be in the same learning model all school year. We also may not be in the same learning model all calendar year. Planning, case rates, and input will help us with those decisions. With that, I open it up for questions or comments.
All right, so I am just going to reiterate one or two things before we go to questions and comments. So our survey went out to staff and to families today, and we are working with outreach members, special ed team leads, school secretaries and principals to try to get 100% of our families participating. We'll plan then transportation, food, supports, and also the specific model of hybrid that we end up implementing based on a lot of that input. And our hope is, and our plan is, to be able to announce that to the board August 17th, which is at our next board meeting. The other thing to keep in mind, and I don't think I could say it enough, is for people who select distance learning, they're able to select that and remain in distance learning regardless of whether or not the district is in hybrid or in person. So for those who are concerned or contacting us to say that we don't want our kids in school, we do have full programming that's been designed and continues to be designed and improved over the course of the entire summer to make sure that we have the strongest, most vital distance programs possible. So with that, I will stop and turn it to Crystal to lead board members through questions or comments.
Great, thank you. So yes, board members now each have time for questions and or comments. And in these virtual meetings, to try to make that go as smoothly as possible, what we do is go in alphabetical order, and board members will pass it to each other once they are done. So with that, Paula Cole is up first.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Steve. Every time I hear the number of teams working, I feel so proud of our district and so thankful for all of the continued organized and thoughtful management through this very, very difficult time. To clarify, did you say that the service went out to families already, or are they going to, or what's going on with that?
Yes, the survey to staff went out late morning, I believe. And then the survey to families went out, I believe, around 6:30, 6:45 today. Okay,
thank you. Yeah, I got the, yeah, all right, thank you. And so just keep up the good work. I've been sheltering in place, high time. I've been working hard too, but I look forward to knowing more details later of what things are really going to look like, because as a mom, I'm thinking a lot about just kids and teachers, and really wondering how this is going to look like to ensure that everyone can be safe in our buildings. And I'm very thankful for the opportunities for families to have this choice. So I think I'll stop for now. Christine.
Thank you, Paula. I would also agree it is an amazing amount of information, but also just how everything was put together when this report just came out, or our guidelines just came out on Thursday. So this is really an impressive amount of information and some really good planning. And I know going into the fall, there's a lot more to figure out, but I think the survey will help answer a lot of questions for us. A couple things that I would point out. from the presentation, there's a guideline from the governor about face shields and or masks. And from what I know about CDC guidelines, face shields alone aren't adequate or aren't known to offer or proven to offer any protection. So I think it kind of brings to my mind as I look through all of this that that we need someone with kind of that medical knowledge on this fall planning team. And I learned today that Pete Tensing, our board member, who is a doctor, is on that team. And we also have some other people. So that is good to know. Just making sure that once we get this all together, that we kind of correlate with best practices and recommendations by CDC and MDH. And then the other thing that that I didn't get initially until Steve explained it to me. So I'm going to ask if he'll maybe elaborate on it a little more about what the hybrid learning means and how it helps to decrease the number of students in the classroom and why that's the next step if your rate of infection is increasing.
Sounds good. All right, so there's a couple of things to respond to there. So I will start with talking a little bit more about hybrid. When we talked about hybrid early in the year, hybrid has many ways of defining, and there really is no specific definition of hybrid. So I'm going to give a few examples of what hybrids could be and some of the things that we are taking input on. A hybrid could be a teacher teaching in their classroom in front of 10 kids. They could be live streaming themselves to another 10 kids in their homes who are participating in the classroom. And that same teacher could be live streamed to another 5 students who are in an auditorium, let's say socially distanced supervised. So that one teacher with some in the classroom, some in an auditorium, and some in their homes, all of them getting live teaching, some in person, some on a live stream. That would be one example of a hybrid. A hybrid example could include some students coming Monday, Tuesday, while the other ones are participating at home. And then it could switch that group of people. So 9 students or 10 students for a teacher in the classroom on Monday, Tuesday, and that teacher has 10 other students who are at home participating at Monday and Tuesday from home, then switching so that those 10 students who were in the classroom are now at home during the days after. The other thing that could happen in a hybrid is that there are teachers who then become full distance teachers, and they are teaching distance while others are teaching in person. And then any form of mix that goes in there. One of the things that we learned when the governor announced is that we should be prioritizing younger students. And so as you look at the models where they have elementary, for example, in person and secondary hybrid during some case rates, what that means is that as we look at our hybrid, it doesn't mean everyone would necessarily come the same amount of days. So it is possible that elementary students come 5 days and secondary students come 3 days. It's possible elementary students come 3 days and secondary students come 1 day. It's also possible that within a middle school or high school, and these are some preliminary conversations we'll have with our planning teams, and I'm going to talk about that next, that we decide that 6th graders and 9th graders entering their building should have more days than the other older students in the building. So it's possible that 6th grade is 3 days a week and 7th and 8th graders each come 1 or 2 days a week. It's possible that 9th graders come 4 days a week and the other students come 1 or 2 days. And so as we look at and build over the next couple of weeks that hybrid, we're really going to be looking at that parent feedback, but also the planning team feedback in regard to what's best for kids and what is best for learning. So that hybrid component is something that could be all over the place in the way it lands. And what it does is if you have 10 kids in a classroom on one day and a different 10 on a different day, the only way those 10 could possibly pass COVID in that situation is between the adults. So there's one point of contact. And it was actually Dr. Tensing that explained this to me. However, if all the students are in the class at the same time, they can all pass it to one another. And so by staggering the number of students, it provides less interaction between the groups, or less ways to do, or fewer ways to do that. The other thing that we're doing, and this isn't just obviously the superintendent doing all this planning, is that there are core teams. There have been 15 teams planning throughout the course of the summer with 15 leaders from across our organization. There's an elementary group, a secondary group, an ELL group, a special ed group, an operations group, a transportation group. And they all have really been looking at two specific problems. How do we create the most effective distance learning program for our students? Because that is what's new to us. And how would we create the most safe in-person program? So you take the most improved distance learning and the safest in person, and those teams come together to plan that to create the hybrid, which is essentially mixing and creating the safest in person at the same time as the most effective distance. And so we have 15 teams, including those, as Christine pointed out, some expertise from the medical fields are looking at operations and some of those technical components. And then our expertise instructionally are looking at how do we create that best programming for all of our kids. I think I have responded to each of those comments, so I'm going to pause again and turn things back.
Thank you. The other couple things I have are, is it too early to think about this, or have we contemplated anything about fall sports?
So fall sports have begun from a planning phase. And so new activities director, Jared Ellerson, has already been meeting with coaches and setting structures up. Similar to the spring, we are anticipating having fall sports, whether there is a large set of sports on site or not. Coaches will be working with their students. It will work in terms of making sure they are physically fit. And so there are training plans that will happen virtually. And then they will also be doing academic support-based work depending on the level of workload of that physicality. If we are able to begin sports on the 17th of August, which is the typical start date for some of our sports, we anticipate them beginning. And if we are not, they will begin doing that work. They'll begin doing that work to make sure that our athletes are physically ready and our activities team members are prepared and rehearsed and ready to begin whenever they are able to begin. I believe also that the Minnesota State High School League is having a board meeting soon. And so I believe that they will also be giving us some information in regard to, do we start on the 17th? Do we start earlier? Do we start later? And what are some of those state guidelines that they'll be providing to us?
Okay, thanks. And I'll save that one for summer school. And something else that kind of came to my mind is how do we deal with the potential of open enrollment if we are one of the few districts that are doing in person, like we know Minneapolis is doing all distance, but we need to keep space in our building for our students or for Richfield students. So how do you just not have open enrollment? Do you cap it? Do you limit it? It seems like that could be a challenge to figure out.
Right. So the law, and this is an important conversation, though I have not brought the policy back at this meeting. I anticipate us taking a look at the policy on August 17th, which is we can only technically cap enrollment based on a board action at a grade level or at a site level. And so what I would see us doing is we're gathering the information from our students and families over the next 2 weeks. And we're going to have a better idea about our ability and our capacity to host our students in person and our ability to transport our students. If 50% of our families say they aren't coming, we actually will not have a building capacity problem nor a transportation problem. And if 90% of our students and our families say they are every day or would like to, then we are going to be stretched to the edge of our ability to combine things. And so some of that information is going to help us determine what programs to offer and how to do it from a hybrid, but that is also going to inform us as a board and leadership about what level of open enrollment can we have should that happen. I don't anticipate us being the only hybrid programs. And so one of the things, and you all know how this works, but similar to a snow day, when there are challenging decisions to be made, superintendents call each other. And so we are all talking about what is happening. And there are actually now facilitated conversations at a state level that are happening about hybrids. I would say in my conversations, hybrids are much more likely than all distance at this point from the districts that I'm hearing of. And there are a wide range of hybrids happening in a large amount of places. I would not anticipate us standing alone at the end of the day in terms of having students come in.
Okay, that is very helpful. Thank you. And that is all I have. Mr. Paulus.
Thank you, Christine. Just to follow up some of your questions, the State High School League has their board meeting tomorrow. My prediction is that they are not going to be more restrictive than what the governor has allowed for schools, and so that would signal to me that they will. When you combine with the governor's order for youth sports through the summer, that was pretty permissive, allowing with masks, distancing, and other constraints. I imagine they will keep the dream alive, so to speak, and wait and see how schools react to that. Pretty much leave it to local rule is my guess, and that's just a guess. There are some reasons for that. One is they actually want all the members to pay their fall activities fees in full because they desperately need the money. And second, it's supportive of the coaches and it's supportive of the kids to leave open the idea of activities. On open enrollment, so I participated in the MSBA webinar that they had over the weekend, and that was a question that was asked: how are districts planning to manage it? They offered no guidance at the MSBA level. It really was, this is statute. The statute says this, and as superintendent said, the only way for us to change where we are is to change our board policy or vote ourselves closed. I mean, our board policy stands. We would have to vote closed at either grade by grade, building by building, or district wide. And that's a problem we won't know, but that the idea of this is like a snow day, but a gazillion times more significant. If I do think for the health of the district long term, if we were more restrictive than say our immediate neighbors, that would be bad for us. We would likely see families opt out of us and perhaps not come back, and then we would be dealing with that for a while. And so while that is a motivation that is not steeped in public health as a concern, it is an angle of district health, and it would while we work within the guidelines the governor has given us. And so I don't know. I worry that if you were the last district on the line and leaned one way while your neighbors leaned the other, such districts will see without action by those neighboring boards would see enrollment dips. My only question was there were things that came up within the presentation. I think the capacity per classroom was listed as around 17, and I thought we had talked about this at previous meetings that with the 6-foot bubble the rooms could hold more than that. I thought it was low to mid 20s. Am I misremembering, or am I thinking of something different?
So depending on how we measure, so what we ended up doing is, yes, physically you can fit 21, 22. When you look at actual realistic spacing, there's a bunch of different models that we're using, and so we haven't really finalized. And so we believe 17, we might be able to get it higher than that, but we needed to leave some space to move around for the teacher and to allow them to do more than they might do otherwise. Okay.
And so I don't have other questions for the superintendent. I do have comments. I can make them at the end when we talk about reports from board members, more summary from that MSBA note. It was more like, like, for example, while we were here, we got an email saying that they have a draft resolution for our, whatever model we go with. And so that was one of the things they said they were coming out with. And so I'm interested to see what the other, I went to the Friday session. I'm interested to see what the Saturday session had for questions from the audience when we get to that. I have nothing else to ask of the superintendent, so I will pass it to Ms. Mishak.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus. One question I have related to the sort of snow day-esque nature. Will we be able to offer childcare options to our RPS staff who maybe, say, live in Minneapolis and are doing distance learning with their children, but want to work in person in a hybrid or in-person model for Richfield?
So there's a few things we're trying to gain clarification on. The first thing we don't know is whether or not the childcare that we are expected to provide is paid, or if it is a free service. We are not aware of that. And so we are currently in negotiations and trying to figure out what that might look like. It also depends on the level of hybrid that we offer. If we are offering more in person, or if we're able to bring in our elementary kids on a daily basis based on our hybrid, we would not be providing to our own community childcare because the children would be in school. And so that's one permutation that we're going to know in terms of the survey. And then the other question, and we don't have an answer yet, but I'm going to say it out loud so it doesn't come as a shock, would be Minneapolis is actually legally required to provide childcare to their teachers under this model as Tier 1 people. And so my first statement would be Minneapolis folk who live in Minneapolis and have their kids in Richfield, or work in Richfield and have their kids in Minneapolis schools. I apologize. So work in Richfield, but kids are in Minneapolis schools. They should be looking to Minneapolis Public to provide the childcare. We are, however, as a service, looking at the possibility of doing that. That would absolutely, most likely, be for fee in that situation. So that they would be paying for the service if that is what we end up doing.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. In the survey, well, I guess it might not be in the survey, but in the next sort of commitment phase, what do you anticipate being the amount of time families will need to opt into a choice? Will it be, so if they say, opt into a hybrid, is that a year-long commitment, a semester-long commitment, or is that still being determined?
So we are working on that. It is generally recommended that people are choosing it, and the only thing we need them to actually sign into is the distance no matter what. So we are assuming that we're looking for a grading period, which would typically be approximately 9 weeks, but we haven't made that as a final decision at this point, and honestly, some of it matters. All of this becomes this sort of odd art and science of the numbers and what we're able to offer based on the percent that say yes. So the numbers are really gonna tell in that regard.
That makes sense. This next question is kind of a 3-part question, which might be too many parts, but I'm wondering, in your planning teams, how you're determining what the learning needs for staff are before school starts time, and if you anticipate being able to work within the calendar we currently have to meet those needs, or if there's been any discussion about school start date needing to shift in Richfield.
So in terms of professional development, we have a team working on what PD do our teams need to provide effective distance learning. In terms of calendar shifts, I do not anticipate us pushing back the start date. I just can't in good conscience suggest that we have had all summer to plan and we can't start on the 8th of September. That said, it is certainly possible that if we are in a hybrid and we are doing distance learning, it is certainly possible that there is a cleaning day, professional development day integrated in as part of that work, similar to what occurred in the spring. But I can't actually answer that definitively because I don't know what our parents and what our staff are going to give back in terms of the feedback. I would also say it is possible that we shift around some of the PD days and the conference days because in this model, our conferences might be different, and so we might not need the same days or the same methodology that would be used in those ways. So I can see some internal calendar shifts, but probably not that larger picture calendar shift at all.
Okay.
I think I caught all your stuff. Did I miss anything?
You did. That was impressive with the 3-part question. And I was really impressed with the number of planning groups that you have and the fact that you have representatives from all collective bargaining groups in that planning. I think that leads to the strongest possible model to have all those perspectives and is just really important for inclusivity. And I didn't see like an equity or anti-racist group specifically listed. So I was curious if there was one or if those perspectives and those questions are kind of being integrated into all of the groups.
We've been deliberate about integrating diverse leadership and equity strong voices into each of those teams. We also come back as a core planning team. And so we have a core planning team, which is the large group of 15 and then some other leaders, and then those teams go off. And one of the activities we have when we bring everybody together each week is to begin that dialogue around centering ourselves on what is our actual task. And so we talk a lot about serving our most underserved students, bringing things together to make sure that we are not losing the best of what we're providing in distance or the best of what we're providing in our in-person programming, and making sure that all our conversations around serving every single student in Richfield, which obviously means making sure to take that extra focus on the most marginalized, underserved students that we have.
Awesome. Thank you. And my last question is, other than approving or voting on whatever plan the district comes up with for August 17th for a finalized version, is there anything the board can be doing to support in terms of policy, or any obstacles you've run into that maybe are beyond a district level that we could be advocating for in our city or state bodies?
That is a very good question. So one of the so everybody received from MSBA today a sample resolution, and I think one of you all brought that up. It's an interesting question, is whether or not it is a board-approved learning model or not. I don't actually know the answer to that. What I do know is, and this is as much for you all, because you all know how I work, as it is for everybody listening, I'm going to be gathering a lot of feedback on my thoughts over the next 2 weeks as I integrate and synthesize feedback. So I do that with our team, and I also do that with board members. And so the best thing I can ask board members to do is really think about what are the things that you want to make sure are integrated into the plan. And you each have your areas of expertise. So for example, as a science professor and somebody who is looking at the CDC guidelines, Christine immediately honed in on, hey, Steve, we really need to look at face masks versus face shields, because even though there seems to be a choice, the guidelines don't suggest that shields are a good thing. And so if there are areas within your expertise, and you as a district leader in another district who does a lot of work in equity and anti-racism would be looking at some of the work that we're doing and see if there's something we are missing. And so things to point out, because even as we go on the 17th, we're not going to have all the details perfected at that time. And so that's also that ongoing look. So that's one piece. And then the other thing from a policy perspective, you see that we're going to be talking again about transportation and boundaries and those pieces. We are going to be talking about, and I didn't come up with the open enrollment myself. I'm basically launching into that because you all reminded me essentially, is that we need to look at open enrollment and possibly be ready to close if that's the case. If there are board policies that you can think of that are weirdly impacted by COVID and what happened, bringing those to our attention as a team, so we can bring them back to the full board and examine, do we need to make a change or two based on what we have coming up? So it's a great question.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. With that, I'll pass it on to Chair Brackey.
All right, thank you. The benefit of going last in the order is that I get to cross some things off. The downside to that is it probably is going to make mine feel even more random in terms of the things that I'm thinking about. I would say one overarching umbrella, and this I know is also shared by Pete Tenson, who can't be here tonight, but we spoke yesterday, is the importance of communication and expectation setting over the next several weeks. And I think all of us are so profoundly grateful for Jennifer Valley and her work in leading communications efforts for our district. And I think the next few weeks are going to be a really significant test of how we can stay in close contact, how we can help people understand what we are hearing and why we are making the decisions that we are making, and that people feel heard, even if what their preference was ends up not being an option for fall. And I think just continuing to push actually having a definition of hybrid that makes sense to people. I think it's confusing. I think the fact that actual full-time virtual is an option and hybrid, whatever we determine it to be in Richfield Public Schools, is an option, is something we are going to have to keep talking about over and over and over again. So I just think I'm really going to be focused on that piece about how are we communicating with our community, and that includes staff. It includes folks who care deeply about Richfield Public Schools, but might not have a child in our system at the moment. So just really wanting to make sure we're focusing on that. And I believe we are, but it feels important to say out loud. The second thing, and this connects to Allegra's question about racial equity and how to ensure that that is really being embedded within the planning groups. I both appreciate that that is the role of the core team, and would also just like to say that I think there should be guiding questions for each one of the planning teams, so that as they are having conversations and coming up with recommendations, they can be having these conversations and asking these questions, and we can ensure that there is some consistency across these 15 different teams who are sort of sitting with very different and very complex issues. I promise I'll pause and actually let you respond, Steve, at some point. Related to planning teams, I think we referenced a number of points in time in this conversation that there are 15 of them, but I actually think it would be really helpful to be specific about what they are, who is on them, and actually let people into the process and who is doing this work. I'm getting closer. I think that one final update, and then I'll close with two questions. The final update is Intermediate District 287, which we are obviously a member of, and some of our students and community members are part of that district through us. Obviously has their own set of decisions to make. We had a 287 board meeting last Thursday, so the same day that the guidance came out. So incredible kudos to those staff members who were able to present on that same day. I think they are likely going to be starting in more of a distance model, but have defined, I think it's 4 different tiers of distance versus sort of hybrid and in-person. So just wanted people to know that that's sort of where our 287 partner is at the moment. That brings me to the 2 questions. One, Steve, I think it might be helpful for people to be able to hear from you why your current point of view is that we should have some in-person options and offerings to the extent we feel able to do so safely, because it is different from Minneapolis and St. Paul, who have already taken a pretty public stance that they are going to start the year all distance. And then I think the second question is, what are we doing to really hear from our staff? What their preferences are, and what degree of choice are our staff going to have in terms of the different models and where they fit in, given whatever their role in the district is. And now I'm done.
All right, so that's a lot. So
I know, sorry.
So August 17th, I will, in my overall report, I will add a slide in regard to the teams that we've had, who is participating, and each of those pieces. And so we'll also talk about racial equity, some of the conversations and guiding questions that we've used to center people, and I'll bring that in the overall report. And so I'll make sure that that is present. I'm going to actually take your second question first, which is about staff and their preferences, and then I will go on to why we are having a conversation around some in-person. So in terms of staff, and board members will receive a PDF of the questions asked to families. But it is important to note that we gave a survey similarly to staff. And so staff are having the option of sharing their information with us about what they would prefer, why, and what they would sign into. And so we are directly asking that to staff. But I would also say that while staff have a choice, there is one component that came out both where the presentation in the governor's speech then got a real clear clarification, which is that staff should be able to have that choice in relation to distance learning to the fullest extent possible. And so if we, for example, were in a full distance program, then obviously everybody can teach from home. If, however, we are in a full in-person program and we need our full teaching staff to do that, then there is a decision tree in HR about immunocompromised staff or staff that follow the specific guidelines of COVID-19 that might not be able to work in that circumstance. But then it is no longer a preference, it is a health-based component. So those are some of the conversations that are going to happen over the next month. I don't participate in those in any way, shape, or form, nor do I gather information. What I know in the end is the staff who are working in whatever programs, and HR does that conversation in the appropriate and professional and legal ways. So that's what I would say from a staff perspective, and that survey went out literally around noonish today. Then you asked me a question about why we should have some in-person programming when a couple other districts have already announced distance. And so I think this is a really emotional, challenging time we're living at in our country and in our state. And we all have some very strong feelings about what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. The reality is I am a professional educator. I have been trained as an educator my entire life, and everything I have is in that category. I am not a trained health expert. And I'm going to push the community to acknowledge the same thing, that they are not, in many cases, trained health experts either. Now, that doesn't change that I have some strong feelings, but what it changes is that I am not the foremost expert in this particular subject area. What I do feel good about, however, is that there are experts in these areas. And so they have determined where cases pass more frequently, where cases are more dangerous, and along with the governor have created some guidelines. And those guidelines tell us when it is most likely appropriate to be in person and when it is most likely appropriate to be in distance. And while it's certainly possible for us to, pardon the sports metaphor, Monday morning quarterback the CDC and the Department of Health and the governor, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let the experts be the experts. And so if the case rates are such that we are able to bring students in, we know from an equity perspective that our students do a better job of learning and we are more successful with students when they're in front of us, in many cases. We also know that there are some things in distance learning that really benefited kids, and so we want to take each of those pieces too. And as you and I had this conversation before, because obviously we have COVID spreading, one of the things that I think about is there are hot spots in the country. We are not actually currently one of those. And so while COVID is certainly significant in our community based on the numbers, there are areas with more and there are areas with less outbreaks of COVID. And so I don't know what the exact rate for how much we should have students in. I do know there are experts, and my plan, at least to run with the board and push you all on, is for us to listen to those experts rather than make that decision ourselves. And I'm going to try to stay right in that spot for as long as I can. So with that, I hope that answered that question.
Yes, and I asked because I think it's important for people to hear that is your point of view and the lens through which you are approaching the decisions that you are charged with as superintendent, and bringing the recommendations to us. So thank you, I appreciate it. I am going to do a final open call for comments or questions from board members that may have arisen since they had their turn, because it has been a long discussion. And I see a hand from Mr. Paulus. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Crystal. I was going to do this later, but I guess I'll summarize some of the MSBA call notes because they came up in individual comments from the board and from the superintendent. On the employees who request to work remotely, the governor first made it sound like it was we have to accommodate, and then that was further clarified to the extent possible, like Steve said, and that we could run into resource constraints, and how do we handle that will be something, how we prioritize one request over another will be tricky, and then the MSBA discussion got into all the various types of leave if a person didn't feel comfortable performing in their role at this time. On the provided guidance on the learning plan and whether or not we need to approve it or have a resolution supporting it, it was strongly suggested that we talk about it openly and have it, even if we don't vote on it, given how publicly criticized it's going to be. We have to give full, it was strongly recommended that the board vote on it or at least have open discussion and appear supportive of it, or majority supportive of it at least before enacting, given how exciting the decision will be. On masking, one of the things that the MSBA had hoped to get away with the governor's executive order on requiring masks as carrying the day, but then within the governor's announcement or the back to learning, it listed boards will have to have a policy on masking. And so the MSBA is scrambling to come up with language for a masking policy. And they already recognized it will be difficult for us to implement it in time, given the deliberate nature that we adopt policy, first read, second read, and adoption. And so that is something they are working on. And one of the other things that didn't come up, but when we talk about scheduling for hybrid and in person, we are within we can have different, it doesn't have to be cookie cutter that everyone in this grade is Monday, Tuesday. We can factor in things like a student's individual needs, if it's an IEP or a different kind of plan, and have students on campus or off campus more or less than what some of their peers are based on their individual plans or needs. And I think that's really it in terms of what the MSBA had. But some of those comments did come up earlier, and I wanted to circle back on those.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
You did a great job of sharing some of the big conversation at core planning tomorrow, which is the conversation is really around who do we prioritize in the buildings and why? And from an anti-racist equity perspective, how do we make sure that we are acting equitably in how we structure this overall hybrid schedule?
Any other final comments or questions from board members? All right, we are now going to turn to our second topic. Thank you for all of our staff who hung on through this one, though I am guessing this is of real interest to all of you since it affects your day-to-day lives so much. We are now going to turn to our summer school presentation.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Egberg, and I'm the Richfield Summer School Coordinator. Thank you for the opportunity to share some information with you about our summer programming. We actually had 7 different programs running this summer, both on-site and distance learning. Here we have our enrollment and attendance data broken down by ethnicity. For our on-site programming, as you can imagine, we had to implement quite a few health and safety protocols to keep our staff and our students safe. We had the support of Dan Kretzinger and Phoebe Anderson, who provided an extensive staff training for us, for our on-site staff, around the protocols that we would be putting in place. We also found that communication with our families was very important. We did have on-site nurses at both Central and at RDLS, and they really helped us determine when a student had to stay at home if they were experiencing symptoms, when we had to call parents and ask them to come get a student. We used the Minnesota Department of Health decision tree to help guide our decisions about that, and did ask students to stay home for 10 days if they were experiencing certain symptoms. Here are some of our protocols in action. Breakfast and lunch were delivered to the classroom and students ate at their desks. We had lots of signage and stickers around the building reminding staff and students about social distancing, wearing masks, just some good health practices. Here are some more protocols in action. Each student had their own supplies. They each received a backpack with supplies, so nothing was shared within the classroom. And we did have a lot of students wearing masks. Before Governor Walz's mask mandate, I would say about 50% chose to wear masks. And then after the mandate, of course, 100%. So all adults, staff, and teachers wore masks 100% of the time. We also had health and safety protocols on the bus. Students were spaced out. We had staggered arrival and dismissal. and they were cleaned after every route. So we had a lot of takeaways from our on-site programs. One big takeaway was the need for a backup plan for staffing because of that recommendation to stay home for 10 days. If you are experiencing symptoms, we had some staff that were out for an extended period of time, and we needed substitute teachers. Also, that attendance of our students did kind of fall off because of that 10-day period to stay home. When your program is only 3 weeks long, that's a big chunk of the time. Moving on to our distance learning program, we provided both synchronous or live and asynchronous learning experiences for our students. And here are some examples of schedules. We found that both students and families really liked the synchronous model, the live teaching. They found it more engaging and they felt more successful as students with that model. We got some feedback from our middle school students. And here are some direct quotes from our middle school students. Our special education extended school year program also ran both on-site and distance learning programming, and they had a lot of the same takeaways that the other programs did. The importance of the family communication, a little bit of the challenges around attendance. One thing that was different with special education for the on-site program, they found their students had a harder time with the protocols around not touching, not having that physical touch. So that was a little bit challenging for those students in that program. But other than that, a lot of those same takeaways. And here are some pictures from our extended school year program at Central. Both our DLS staff and Central staff utilized a lot of the outdoor spaces for the on-site program. We had beautiful weather and we were able to get outside, really space the kids out and do some activities in the outdoors, which the kids enjoyed and, you know, is part of the health recommendations to prevent the spread of COVID. So it was a win-win. And now is the opportunity for you to ask us any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Superintendent Yanowski, is there anything that you would like to add before I turn it over to board members?
I would just say, I just want to be, as board members frame questions, I'm very proud and impressed with the work that our team did for summer school. We thought it was important, given the case rate and the guidance from the state, for us to begin examining some of the things that we would be doing in the fall. And so we did have a by choice for both staff and student summer school and a by choice distance programming. We did implement methodologies that fit as hybrid. And so we really wanted to make sure that our team was prepared, and our summer team did a great job of working with their teachers, gathering feedback and continuing to improve the program. And so even though it was 3 weeks, this team you see in front of you this evening did a great job of just continuously improving what we were offering our kids to make sure that not only were we serving our kids very well in the summer, but we were really set to serve our kids even more effectively in the fall. And so I'm thankful to this team, and I'm thankful to the work of the larger summer team, because they did a great job from a larger Richfield perspective. So I'm just thankful and wanted everyone to hear me say it out loud. With that, Crystal, I'll turn it to you for questions with the board.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for kicking it off with that appreciation. It's very important. Paula, you're up first.
I'm very impressed with all of the work that you have done, and if it weren't for like the things that had to change, no one would even know that this happened in the middle of a pandemic when there was so many things unknown, and you were able to pull it off successfully. And I'm just very thankful for providing that space that I know felt special for children, especially when we were all called for isolation and so many different things were happening, and it really must have felt like heaven for them, and it sounds that way. So I just wanna say thank you for that. Christine?
So I would second what Paula said. I was able to visit the summer school at RDLS while it was going on, and it was just heartwarming to see kids. You know, they were following the rules and they were separated, but they were clearly happy to be there, as well as the staff. Everybody looked like they were exactly where they wanted to be. And it was just nice to see real classroom learning and teaching going on, and a lot of happy people. And the one thing I have been thinking about is the experience of that staff being the first ones to come back and teach in a mask in that environment. And I'm hoping that they will share tips and suggestions to the teachers coming in the fall, because they have an experience that most other people don't. And I think if you haven't yet worked 8 hours or more in a mask, it's really hard to imagine what it would be like. So hopefully they'll share all their tips and we'll have good information from them. But again, it was a huge benefit to our students to have that option to be able to go. And I am very grateful for the teachers that volunteered to go in and teach in the classrooms when things are so uncertain. It couldn't have been easy, but you could tell they were very happy when I went in and got to tour. So thank you guys, and thank you for being here to present with us tonight.
So Christine, the one thing I want to respond to, and so the team members you see before you organize the method by gathering voice, input, and recommendations from their team members. And so they created Google surveys and they created in-person staff lounges, for lack of a better description, where people could come in, share the things that were happening, and then they did an incredible job of documenting. So our core teams and our study teams can look at that, and we can continue to improve from their recommendations. And so ladies in front of you tonight actually created those plans and moved us forward in that work.
Thank you. I'll hand it off to Tim. All
right, thank you. Just to reiterate, just how impressive it seems to have gone, impressively well. It seemed to have gone great. Enormous amount of gratitude for those who went through it, because I know you're going to take that knowledge and information and experience and share it with so many of your peers, and we will certainly need it in the upcoming year. I wish it was less. On the attendance, and that this is something that might translate into the fall as well, is the drop off, and you know, I think one of them seemed, I think it was Spartan Academy, seemed relatively low, and I didn't have a comparison point for how that compared to prior years, but my guess is that that's lower than typical, and we have to acknowledge how strange a year and summer this has been. And so I guess so, when understanding that as a number, for those who were present, engagement was at its usual level, I trust. Okay, well, that's good to hear. And so, and I know that, Teresa, do you have something?
Well, I was just going to respond to that. Yeah. So numbers were low due to, not being able to recruit the way we would. We weren't in the buildings. We didn't have the information we needed when we could have gotten to the most of our families. The other piece you may have seen in the slide is Luckily for our students, there were athletic options happening. And so given the choice of go be around people and outside and moving or be online, we did have some families who were enrolled prior to the start date that chose that, which completely makes sense. And so we did have lower numbers because of that, but the students who were enrolled were very, very engaged. If you have a chance to check in with RHS's principal and vice principal, the AP, on the last day, we had a meet and greet and asked questions with them, and the students talked about all the things that they enjoyed about Spartan Camp and what they learned, and they asked all kinds of questions of what to be prepared for. So the kids who were in it really did walk away with feeling that they were ready for what's to come, whatever that looks like, if it's online or if they're in the building.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll pass it to Ms. Mishek.
Thank you. I want to reiterate what some board members have already said in gratitude, and also just recognizing your bravery. I think I have a lot of colleagues who don't have health risks and are usually pretty big risk takers in their day-to-day life, and they're still pretty scared for the start of the school year. So I think you must have had some of those feelings too. So thank you for being brave. I'm just impressed by that. And I also want to thank you for the gift of being able to see what this might look like. I think that's what I've been wondering, what other people have been wondering, and both in this presentation and also in the video that I can't remember which news station, but that Richfield was highlighted in. That was kind of a gift you gave to everybody in Minnesota to see what this might look like. And I'm just very impressed with how well you documented it. And as I was going through the board packet earlier, like all the questions I had, like, I wonder how students felt about it compared to spring. Well, you asked and you had feedback. So that was just really, really helpful to look through. And my only question for you, I'm just curious if there's anything kind of like Christine mentioned, like having to wear a mask for 8 hours a day, or like any tips, positive or negative, or things that surprised you that you would want to tell your colleagues or families or board members as we kind of continue to plan for fall?
I think, and again, I was not in the classroom, but just supporting teachers and being out in the hallways and seeing how everything was going, it actually kind of surprised me how well everyone adapted to the new protocols. By the first week, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, everybody wears a mask, and students knew to stay, 6 feet apart. And, I think students are incredibly resilient, and I was impressed how quickly they just kind of rolled with it. I think they will do better than we think. That was kind of my big takeaway. Meg and Amber, I know you were also on the on-site program. I don't know if you have anything to add about ESY on-site.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just add that and I know I'm happy that as a district, we're planning a lot of social emotional learning for the first few weeks of school. What I saw is kids were adaptable, but I think when kids have special needs, sometimes those feelings kind of come pouring out a little more readily and in a little more verbal or physical way than would be typical. And so we saw, especially on the first day, a few kids really having a hard time. There was one little boy in tears and another one who is verbal, but less verbal than maybe you or I, kind of having some trouble getting out his words and screaming and yelling at first. And but with the kind of caretaking of staff and a slow start and intentional work on the part of staff, I would say in particular, by the end of the first day, and certainly by day 2, it was like different. It was a very different feel for those little kiddos. So that wasn't everybody, but in a small group of 18, they really stood out, and they just, for me, reiterated that importance of easing kiddos back into the school year since they've been out of school since mid-March.
Thank you. I'm trying to have good Google Meet wait time. It's so painful.
I'm going to give a chance for other thoughts too. So if you want to pass it over to me, people can keep thinking because I'm also.
I'll pass it to Chair Brackey with an opening.
So yes, for our staff on the line, I'll share just sort of the very open prompt that in a couple minutes, I'm just going to see if there's anything else that you want to share with us, because you have been here with us for over an hour now, and I want to make sure that we give you time and space to actually share anything that you want us to hear, and folks who are also watching this meeting. So I'm going to open it up to that momentarily. I think the two things I wanted to share first is one, I was also able to visit summer school programs in person at RDLS and also make a virtual visit to the middle school program, both of which were just phenomenal experiences to actually be able to visualize for the first time what you all as our staff have been doing and what our students have been experiencing, not just this summer, but also through the spring. And so it was incredibly helpful. And I also described it as inspiring because I think it helped me see what was possible in a way that was really hard for me to imagine without seeing it for myself, and to see the ways and hear the ways that staff are coming together and are experiencing this, and then to be able to see and interact with our kids too. So it was wonderful, and I'm excited to be able to do some of those same visits in the fall, whatever our models are going to be. I really am hopeful that as we get preferences from staff through the survey, and as we get preferences from parents and guardians and students through the survey, that we might be able to find a way to meet people's preferences and needs where they are, the way that we were able to this summer. That is sort of a deep hope and priority of mine, so that everybody gets a chance to be in a model that feels safe and right for them, the way that you all were able to do this summer. So again, thank you for leading the way on that front. And then Meg, just to what you were saying, this is probably just a connection to the fall planning conversation, but how important it's going to be for us in the fall to really have space and skill in supporting students through some real trauma that they have been experiencing over the last few months. Whether it is things that they have personally experienced or just what they are seeing by watching the world outside on so many different fronts, not just the pandemic, but also the long overdue reckoning that we are facing in our society around race, around disparities, around a lot of different pain that has been caused and that people are experiencing. And so I just appreciate you for saying that, and really want to take it to heart and make sure that we are supporting our students and our staff in that as we come back together in the fall. So with that, I'll stop, and as promised, open it up if there's anything else that any of you would like to share with us.
I just would like to, quickly recognize the team. Erin Burgraff headed up our middle school program. Teresa Statham, who you heard from, our two high school programs, and Meg Hain, our ESY. We also had some fabulous administrative interns. Jenna Way is here with us this evening. Hi, Jenna. And then Rhoda Moallen, Jonathan Heyer, we're at the elementary program. Mike Harris was also an admin intern at the middle school program. That, in addition to really just a district-wide coming together from every department to make this possible. So I just would like to throw out an appreciation that this was truly a team effort that began way back in March when we tried to figure out what summer school could look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just echo that and say that that the team feeling of this really made a big difference to, I'll just speak personally, to me as a staff member trying to put together a program. And then even just in some of our meetings here at the end and our debriefing of the programs, it was a neat opportunity to learn from others within other school buildings. Like Erin's idea to have the digital teachers lounge. I was like, oh, finally that went away, you know. So just little tips and tricks that I picked up from others. And then of course the big, huge ask of planning was made much easier by everyone who you see here, and then many, many other people coming together and tackling things from pretty much every angle. And I will also say that the staff that I talked with just in the distance learning program also felt like their program for special ed summer school was very successful. And some of them got kind of excited about how this might open up some opportunities for students who are homebound or other students in the future.
And I'll just kind of jump in on that. I'm Erin Berggraf. I do have to give credit to the Teachers Lounge, to Jenna Way, who is one of our interns. She had a great idea to just have a place where teachers could drop in and ask us questions, and it was really a helpful tool. But I want to say too, in terms of the team effort, some feedback that we got from our teachers was that they really appreciated that they not only had some professional development and planning time prior to the start, but really ongoing weekly sessions where we came together as a staff and we could collaborate and share ideas about what was working and really pivot as our program evolves. And I think that will be a really important thing to consider as we jump into fall, that we, you know, and we all know that we'll need to pivot and do that, but teachers enjoyed and appreciated having that input throughout. And I think they not only learned from each other, but they learned from the students. And I think that really made it a vibrant program from start to finish.
I will just add for the middle school. First of all, it was such a pleasure. So thank you for letting me be here. And then also it was lovely to work with Erin. But I got to work with our middle school math teachers, and we knew that the curriculum, we needed to try using the curriculum that we use during the school year. So I had each teacher do at least 2 CPM lessons. And the biggest takeaway was that we definitely need the breakout rooms that Google Meets is adding onto this fall. It was a huge request across all subject areas, but particularly because I worked most closely with math, we talked about it nearly every day. I'm like, man, it would just be so much easier if I could pull this kid into a breakout room, discuss with them real quick, and then send them back, just like you would in a classroom for intervention. And then one more thing to add with Erin, as we were leading these PDs every Thursday, I think part of the reason that it was very well received by staff is, yes, it was reflective of what they said that they needed, but it was also given in the same format as we asked them to make their lesson plans. So the accountability that we put on teachers was also the accountability that we as an admin team did. We were always modeling what we expected. And I think the ask then became much easier because we were really on the same team.
And then I actually wanted to talk about credit recovery a little bit, just in that the switch to membership hours and kind of how we account for that and attendance was very different than what we've done in the past. And it made me very, I'm not gonna lie, I was very scared when they told me. I was like, how are we gonna get attendance? This is not gonna work. High schoolers aren't gonna get online in the summer, I don't know. And we really were able to come up with, so what we decided to do was use Go Guardian and require our students to test online. And by kind of forcing them to meet us online for that piece where we could watch them and chat while they were taking a test, they saw how much help they were getting in that process. And it actually expanded into just, they were then working during the hours that we kind of wanted them to work, and then they were reaching out more. And we actually got a lot more interaction with our students than I was expecting for a credit recovery. And it also had to do a lot with the staff I had. They were on it, reaching out to students every way that they could, offering all kinds of help, sending videos to teach different concepts. So credit recovery usually is not my worry in the summer, because it's kind of, they show up, they sit down, they work on what they got to work on, and then they go home. This summer was a little bit more of a worry for me, but it actually worked out really well. And it made me happy because I saw some things that we were kind of already doing at RCEP, but I think that we could do better, and things that I saw that we could pull into our high school program for students who maybe aren't ready to make that jump to RCEP, but need some additional credit recovery options. And so that that was a really good learning moment we had.
And I'll just jump in and say one thing. This is the model that we used for core planning, for developing our core planning process, because we started planning for summer school and we knew we had to bring in all of these critical stakeholders to be able to roll out a in-person distance model. And we needed all the voices together. And as you see, the majority of this was led by our teaching staff. And that just is a huge shout out to the commitment and skills of our teachers. And so they were the model that we brought forward to core planning. So as administrators, we might facilitate it, but it was really modeled after this group here.
Thank you. Really appreciate all of you for sharing just some additional insights and thoughts with us. Board members, I'll do one final call for any additional questions or comments that came up.
I had just one quick question that came up for me. So you talked about students with symptoms and then they didn't come back. Did those students who had to be out for 10 days, did they have the option of moving into distance learning during that time?
Unfortunately, given that it was a 3-week program and most of our distance learning classes were full, we could not offer that. We weren't quite that nimble, but if we have a similar model next summer, I think that we will then definitely, with our learning this summer and throughout the year, be able to offer that. But no, that was not a possibility this summer, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. That's great.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate all of you for spending your Monday night with us. With that, we will move on to our third topic in the superintendent update. Go ahead, Superintendent Yanowski.
So as that's getting queued up, obviously you all are welcome to stay. You all are also welcome to check out at any point the conversation and the third of our presentations about school resource officers, and our school resource officer program is on its way now.
Yanowski, back to discuss our relationship with school resource officers in Richfield Public Schools. School districts across the state and country are conducting similar analyses, as this is an important time to review our relationships. The school board tasked me with this analysis, and I will be making a recommendation this evening. As a reminder, the program began nearly 30 years ago, designed to increase safety in schools and create fast access to police, with an officer assigned both at the middle school and high school, creates positive relationships with students, and uses a methodology called community-based policing. Currently, we are in the final year of a 4-year contract expiring on June 30th, 2021. This contract also provides an option for a 30-day cancellation at any time. Funds used in this contract approximate $75,000 yearly and come from our Safe Schools levy, which provide a wide number of supports of school-based safety. Our resource officers are a trained police presence in our schools, trained in our policies and expectations, and they are designed mainly to build relationships and support community-based policing while also supporting our larger safety and security programs. School resource officers are one piece of a large safety team at the school and district level. At the building, it includes the principal, social worker, therapist, and a number of other appropriate staff members. In our secondary schools, there are also Richfield Public Schools staff security, our activities director, and our school resource officers. As part of my review, I also noted that there are statutes and rules that govern this work, that make sure that the SRO remains separate from both student data and school discipline. I also examined our policies, research, and also formal police actions taken by our school resource officers. Richfield Schools has 14 policies mentioning police, but there are 3, all mandatory in the state of Minnesota, that move into my recommendation components. They define cooperation in the use of officers while clearly stating that they are separate and will remain separate from all data. In examining research, I noted studies that are split in both analysis and impact. There are studies claiming that school resource officers increase the likelihood of student involvement in the penal system and thus add to the school to prison pipeline. Other studies suggest just the opposite, that school resource officers in schools help students stay out of the penal system and thus reduce this likelihood. In regard to our resource officers, we found 16 tickets or police citations written over the past 3 years, 6 assault-based events, 2 theft, 2 drug sales, and 6 vaping, most likely the illegal substance of THC, after a warning. In a first incident, our officer meets with the student and family and works together towards restitution and warns of a ticket in a repeat offense. As these incidences are minors, we do not receive any identifying data based on the police work with the student. As a district, we are also very deliberate in keeping police information out of student files. We requested data from the police, compared their citation dates to our discipline dates, and were able to report demographics in most cases. Based on our data, 7 citations were of African American students, 5 Latinx, 1, 2 or more races, and in 3 cases, we were unable to identify the race of the students. While 16 incidences is a relatively small number, it is also important to note that in every incident we could identify, the ticket went to a student of color. I also examined perception data of students related to having SROs in school. The state conducted a survey in spring 2019 about school climate. It was taken by over 1,000 Richfield students, including 733 secondary students, and one of the questions was about the presence of school resource officers, including about whether or not it is a good idea to have a police officer present in school. While the data was relatively split about the comfort of students reporting illegal activities and problems to the police officers, showing between 53 and 80 or 78% positive responses, students in all age groups and genders reported 90% or higher approval of police officer presence in school. It's important to note that this survey occurred before significant local experiences, including the killings of Brian Quinones and George Floyd at the hands of police. Both these events may have had an impact on the feelings and perceptions of our students. We decided to survey secondary students this summer to help our analysis. We contacted all students and also followed up to make sure that there was data representing all of our student demographics. 362 secondary students took our survey, representing 17% of our student population. While our responses are not perfect in their representation of our full demographics, they were spread well across grade level and also had over 50% students of color in their response, including almost 18% African American students and 27% Latinx. There were 5 questions asked, including, I like having an SRO at my school, and I feel safer with an SRO at my school. Open comment section, and also wanting an opportunity to discuss this further. Overall, there were 2 areas with small, statistically significant relationships. In the question, I like having an SRO at my school, 40% of the students were positive, 13% were negative, and the rest were neutral. There was a difference in perspectives, with students showing a great deal of support after their first year in each school, grades 6 and 9, with support being reduced as students remained in the school. There was no statistical significance by racial demographics, but only by age. When asked if students feel safer with an SRO in school, there was a small, statistically significant relationship between ethnicity and feelings of safety with an SRO. Overall, 46% of the students reported feeling safer, while 13.89% reported feeling less safe. Additionally, there was a statistically significant difference with Asian and Latinx students feeling safer. In total, 166 students reported feeling safer versus 50 feeling less safe. We also had a number of adults reach out to us, and we reached out to Education Richfield, administrators, and to our students. You already heard about the students, but both administrators and Education Richfield shared positive feedback on the SRO program and shared statements of general support. In our student feedback, I would also analyze as being generally supportive, though clearly asking for further conversation. Adults from the community were more split in their support, with a number of statements being sent to us asking us to discontinue program, and a similar number of statements asking us to continue. Given this feedback, I'm recommending the following. I recommend that we continue our relationship. However, I believe that we need to take a number of significant steps to support greater quality control, oversight, and long-term analysis of this program. Our current contract that we have, I don't believe has the language that fits the current goals of Richfield schools and our constituents. I suggest that we rewrite the contract, thus ending the old one, and create a 1-year contract expiring on the same date, June 30th of 2021. In this contract, we write clear and rigorous details of the program, outlining very deliberately roles and responsibilities, including structured supports and expectations for each role. I believe the contract should be shared publicly and brought before the board. To ensure this always occurs, I suggest we revise board policy 715 on purchasing. Currently, 715 allows all contracts to be signed by cabinet team members. Our processes have had us bring higher priced and possibly controversial contract proposals to the board. The reality is that in 2017, SROs and police officers in school was not controversial in Richfield schools. By changing policy 715, we can ensure that there is greater oversight and examination of contracts and allows us to change contracts based on changing demographic ideas and changing ideas within our schools. I believe that given student interests, we need to work with our student leadership to empower them to create a larger conversation among students related to the presence of SROs in school. I was overwhelmed in reading that over 100 students want to have further conversation. I think it's imperative on our school leadership and district leadership that we follow up on this request and engage in dialogue throughout the school year on this subject. Finally, I believe that our leadership team should begin a study of other programs that support and would continue to support student safety, either real or perceived, that is supported by our SROs. There are districts that currently have police partnerships that are not financial. There are also districts that have trained staff members who serve in similar roles without a police officer present. As this is part of the superintendent report and not an action item, I'm hoping for feedback on recommendations so that I proceed with next steps. At this time, I will open it for questions or comments.
All right, so since that was longer than my typical presentation because of the amount of things, I'm just going to pause and open it up for questions and comments and also be able to respond to anything from board members.
And we're going to just do alphabetical order as usual. So we'll start off with Paula.
I'm ready. I have one question, Steve. And I have a few questions. I don't know if you want them one at a time.
However you want to do it.
Let's do one at a time.
How about you ask a question, I'll respond, then you ask another question.
Awesome. Okay. The 75,000, is that per building or total? I'm guessing per building.
Total for the whole district for the year.
Total? Okay. And the reason I ask is because of with the limited opportunities for using the funds, that's really not a lot for school counselor then.
So a school counselor on a spreadsheet, and we do average salaries, would actually be more expensive than the 75,000. Mm-hmm. That includes benefits, and it also includes, again, the average salary across the entire district and all benefits included.
Okay, and this question is for the public to know, to hear it, and your answer. Uniformed officers that accounts they're armed.
So that's a really interesting question. And I guess as I look towards some of the feedback that we got from students, that is a question I don't actually have the answer to. I would say that I am concerned, and I am not sure I fully understand what officers should be wearing and or if they should be armed within our schools. Obviously, we are a no guns allowed school, as all schools are. And so it does seem like a point of conflict in regard to why we have an armed officer in the school. And so I have had feedback from board members. I know that I am not a big gun fan myself, having never literally held one in my life. And so I guess in my conversation, should we move forward with my recommendations, I think that is part of the conversation with the police. As we renegotiate and talk about what a one-year contract would be, really having that open question about what is needed and what is needed in our schools. And frankly, again, much like I am not an expert on coronavirus or public health, I am not an expert on policing. I have very little background or knowledge in my role of education. And so I'm not 100% sure what is needed from a police perspective. And larger picture, I'm not sure what we as a schools, because we might have a different perspective, are going to be okay from a police perspective being present in the school's larger picture. I think that absolutely should come up, and I think I absolutely will be asking that question.
Thank you. I think that definitely this should be a question that's clear when we write up the new contract. And the clothing as well. I think if we can make it less, I don't know, less policy, that's another word, never mind.
So I understand. I actually want to respond to that. So I do know that there are different feelings and different uniforms worn by the different officers. And I know that there is a window of what they can wear. And I have seen them in different uniforms. So you can go all complete in police blue top to bottom uniform. I have also seen uniforms as casual as, and I'm going to do my best to describe this, so I hope I don't say this awkwardly, khaki pants and a blue police polo shirt, similar to the tuxedo t-shirt we have all seen. It is sort of a police equivalent thereof, sort of a designed polo shirt that looks like that. And so there is a very wide range that they are able to wear within our buildings and do.
Thank you. I am going to save the question about the tuxedo teacher for another time when we're not discussing serious matters, but I really want to know. One question and then one recommendation. So my last question will be, I'd like to hear clarification of what it means when the data is separated from school discipline versus separated from student data. Like I want to know in these interactions, where does that paperwork get filed? Is that something gets filed like I don't know, an SRO system for the school, the student file, the police file?
Got it. Okay, so the police and the schools are completely separate entities in regard to their data. And so for us, we have a student information system that is accessible by students or school employees by level of their rights. A principal would have rights to all discipline. A teacher would not have rights to all discipline. And so in the student file, we would have a set of pieces, and then our administration is very, very deliberate about not putting police information in there. So if a student is involved in a violent incident that includes a fight or an assault, that most likely would not suggest police were called and police came and wrote a ticket to the student. That would probably not be in the school's database. Okay. The other thing to note is that police do not have access to that database in the disciplinary files. So all of that is kept by the school district, and it relates to the student. From an SRO perspective, similarly, there is complete separation of the police-based files from the school-based files, and those things do not cross. And so if a police officer has been called and is here to handle an assault, for example, at one of our schools, they would then have a case number. We may or may not have that information. We would not know or be privy to the private data in regard to that citation. So the only way for us to find that out, for example, and that's what we did for this, was to create a specific data request asking for it and trying to gather that specific information. And so one of the hard parts of tracking some of this down is our goal of separating out police information from a student file, because student discipline can follow a student, and there could be implications based on a student file and police interactions that happen.
Thank you, Steve. So one of the things in this role about when you're on the school board is that as a servant of the community and Richfield voters, I cannot rule on things just from my personal view, which is why I asked the first time we had this conversation for surveys from the students who are really the ones who, you know, we're here for them. So I want to thank you for collecting the information. I'm very pleasantly surprised at the higher response that we got from our students. I was worried that we would have a hard time, like, you know, finding them or getting them to access the survey. And really, their opinion is overwhelmingly positive for how they feel. I do think they deserve that we review the contract and that we make sure that all the points are going to ensure that we have a positive, continue to have positive outcomes and even improve them going forward. And then the only one thing is that when we are doing, I know that when we're reviewing policy, we do a few reads, and I'm assuming this one's gonna take a while. But what I really hope is that we make this process as open to the community as the most that we can, to really allow for our community, students, teachers, staff members, parents, community members to really weigh in, because obviously there are experiences that we won't know about, and it's important to hear everyone so that we come up with a policy that's really going to offer the best for our kids. So I'll pass it to Ms. Malek now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. So I really appreciate the depth and all of the information that was in the presentation. I think you covered pretty much almost everything that we asked for, and I think that is very helpful as we try to move forward. I pretty much agree with the recommendation of keeping, of redoing the contract and not just bluntly ending the partnership, but really investigating what that partnership is, what it means, how it is a partnership between the city and Richfield Public Schools, and incorporating the information that we got from our students through these surveys. And not just, incorporating what we know now in this, but over this next year, really using this time and our student voice that we've already got some of, but that I think will be even more meaningful when they're in school or when school is at least back in session, to continue to work with our students on what they think the best way to build community relationships and keep our schools a safe place. What do we need to do that? What other things do they think might be more helpful or as helpful as having an SRO in our school buildings? Some of the things in the presentation include one of their main responsibilities is building those community relationships. So I would think one thing we could do is to address how they do this. What work do they do to build those community relationships? What do we do as a district to measure their success and see how well they're doing in meeting those goals that we have, and also how they work within our school safety team. So we have a school safety team. I envision them myself as being more a part of that team, like an integral part of it, but not so much as a separate entity. We also, in the presentation, it also discusses training in our expectations and policies. I think that's an area where we probably need to add more detail and do some more work on what specific training we are going to provide for them and what our specific expectations are and how we hold them to those expectations. And including, I think the other thing that should be included is some type of equity training. I don't know what they experience as police officers, but if we're providing training in what our expectations are, I think that is a key part of what our expectations would include. And then just really the other things are about making them part of that school safety team. And also kind of the idea that in the research that I've read and I've discussed with Steve also, most of the studies show that the success of SRO programs is very dependent on the individual officer. And that makes it a challenge for us to keep a strong program when your officer can change over time and you have some control over who it's going to be, but it's hard to know until they're in the role exactly how they will handle things. So I think that's a challenge that we will have to address. And to what Paula said about the police officers being armed, I noted in the surveys that was something that was mentioned by multiple students, that they would be more comfortable if there wasn't a gun. So I think that's something we should consider. So I think we just need to really be very mindful and careful about how we move forward, how we set up this initial 1-year contract, and then how we work with our students to figure out what the best way is to move forward. I also want to just take a moment to express appreciation for all of the emails and things that we've gotten from community members and other people helping us kind of figure our way through this, because I think hearing what other people's perspectives are really helpful, but especially our student perspective. So thank you for the presentation, for gathering that information. And we'll move on to Mr. Paulus.
A couple things real quick, Tim, before you start. So Christine, I know my team members were frantically typing notes based on what you were saying, but could you also email that to us so that we make sure we capture all of those pieces as we create that new contract or that new contract draft? And then I also want to acknowledge, yes, we were able to get some information from our students, but absolutely, and you can see that within my recommendations, the most important part is to really empower our students to be in that dialogue, to really get a lot more information from them that we can't actually get from a survey, that we can really understand how to make this most effective. All right, I will put myself on mute and send it right to Tim.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to Paul and Christine for covering much of what I might have brought up. I would start with the recommendation from the administration. I understand, and I think it makes sense for now. Part of my motivation, or one of my requirements for undoing the program, is having a firm understanding of what we would replace it with. And while the data was, while the student data was overwhelmingly positive in terms of, was mostly positive and significantly neutral as well on how they feel with an SRO in the building, it was not necessarily a full, we didn't, the true question would have had more to it, in that we are obligated to provide a safe and secure campus, and would have, replaced some of that function with other things. And without being able to articulate what those are, someone saying, oh, I want this, but we've presented it as if there's a vacuum in its absence. And I don't think that's the case. And that's okay. I'm not criticizing it, but at the same time, it was favorable that the students largely felt positive or neutral about it. That said, we still had 13% of the students with negative feelings, and that is a big number from a survey. And there are things that we are obligated to react to, and at some point. And so, like any of our contracts and any of our agreements, we review them on an ongoing basis. And this is one where the divergence of what the goals are for the respective organizations, or we've broken down in our ability to communicate to them and them to hear what we want and them to deliver on it, has perhaps led to some problems. Because, if this was a different vendor, like the milk vendor, where they were on campus all the time, and we had administrative level problems like we have discussed as a board, right? Things that create headaches that just shouldn't be. We would survey our alternatives, whether it was the milk vendor, a transportation vendor, or in this case, the SRO. But for the SRO, we don't have obvious alternatives. There's not a competing law enforcement official that we could bring in. And so, one of the great things about our community is it is so small. Like, as a district, we're small enough to get our arms around it and really work on things. And our community is exactly the same size. And so, I think with some dialogue and some understanding of where we want it to be, we perhaps could fix this if we have partners who are willing to fix it with us and help us get over the perception that this is really a so individual dependent. And so we don't create the law enforcement officers who become SROs. If they come to us from RPD. And so what is RPD doing to generate an infinite supply of, high, like the officer we have at the high school, very high functioning SROs? How do we go about doing that? And so that's something perhaps we can work in together on, or if not, we can agree at some future date to walk away, but not, at which time we would also have a replacement plan in mind. One of the things, as I look through the data, or the other parts of the presentation, it is difficult when, we have talked numerous times about that the officers are not involved in student discipline at all, yet we can find 16 tickets. And I know that's not a lot. It's possible some of them are for after school events and where the responsibilities are very different. That said, we find 16 tickets. All of the ones identifying race are students of color. It's statistically significant. That's not good. That's not good for perpetuating the program, I think. And so I would like to know how that goes, how that comes about, how the officer decides what level of discretion is occurring in these conversations where students are screened and meetings set up with families to intervene. Do the families believe that this is school sanctioned? Like we're not aware of it? These are problem spots. And if the officers don't understand how those could create problems for us, then we really are going to end up talking past each other quite a bit. And so I'd just like to know more about those things. But for now, the data, I appreciated seeing it. I appreciated seeing vastly positive or neutral. But it is the fact that, you know, the negative views are large enough to certainly give us pause as a group. And I'm thrilled to hear some of the students are interested in having further dialogue, because I want to hear what they want. I want to hear what we can do. I want to hear what we can accomplish if we work more openly with RPD and figure out, you know, what it would look like if as a high functioning, thriving program. Because from as we sit here, I don't think I would say it's been a thriving, successful program based on the challenges it's presented. It's had some successes, it's had some misses, some missteps, and you know, we have to a level where I think we have to evaluate it critically. So we'll do that in the next year. And I will pass it to Ms. Mishik.
Thank you for all the work that went into gathering all of this data, and for being so transparent in the data that you collected. I know Tim just said this, but I just feel that it bears repeating that 100% of the tickets that we've been able to identify the race of students were students of color. I think we kind of just need to sit with that for a second. Systems are designed to get the results that they get. And to me, that percentage is illustrative of a broken system. You know, looking at the survey results, I agree that to a large extent they're inconclusive. And sometimes with surveys, like majority rules in how we make our decisions, but I think sometimes that's not what you walk away with, and even a small number in a given situation might be what guides your thinking, because that holds the moral imperative. So that's kind of what I'm wrestling with right now with the results from our survey. But I don't disagree with the recommendation. I think that having a student-led work group or task force on this issue would be really important to build what comes next, which could be SROs. If students come together and determine that that's what they think is the best model moving forward, then that's the model that I'll support. But it is really important to me that that work be not only inclusive of student voice, but truly led by students, and at a minimum inclusive of students that maybe don't always pop up as what we think of as student leaders. And I don't know who could take this charge. Maybe it's you, Steve, but maybe it's somebody else. Who some of those young people might be that are passionate about racial justice issues. I was thinking about the project that students do in social studies, like seniors. I believe it's seniors only. With Mike Harris had some students present to us this year. Like maybe that's a topic that students are interested in, that they could work on for that project, and you know, also lead part of the work or be involved. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of different leadership within Richfield schools that might be interested in collaborating. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. One of the questions I have that I don't know the answer to is ticketing required by SRO? So for example, if I'm an SRO in a school and I'm investigating a drug sale, and I do find, in fact, that illicit drugs have been sold by a student, am I like required to ticket?
So there is some complexity to that answer. So the answer is, to the best of my understanding, I am not a policing expert, but I will tell you I've had some very direct and uncomfortable conversations with our partners with the city. To the best of my understanding, what I would say is police are not and will not look the other way. So that is the first thing. So they will take some form of action, or they are expected to, or they could lose their badges. What said action is then where the judgment comes in. And so I guess I would ask you as a board member, and I'm going to ask this rhetorically, but at what point would you suggest that things go from a school-based student or child-based behavior issue to a police-based issue? I don't know that line, and I'm not sure when that is, but that is some of the judgment that is then made in some regards. And then to the greatest extent we have possible, within our schools, the only way that would become a police action is if an administrator had referred that to the police officer for support, or if the police officer in their own supporting community policing had come across it themselves. And so there are several quality control or safeguards in regard anyways, in some ways, that are connected to that situation. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Connected to that question, I know you answered this a little bit in talking about like having to do the data request for those particular citations. And I'm just, I'm feeling a little discomfort around having unknown citations happening within Richfield schools. And I don't know if you...
Right, I understand, and I have discomfort also, and there's a lot of complexity to that also. And so here's what I would say. One way for us to track to the best of our ability would be for us to put it in the student record. And now a police citation or calling police is in a student's record for honestly the rest of their academic career. That would be the actual cleanest way in terms of student discipline for us to do that. I can tell you that our administrators were very deliberate and very clear in telling me that they did not want to do that. They did not feel like that was appropriate. The second way to do that is what's called desk drawer notes. However, those are accessible and can be gotten from a court of law, which would mean that they would create a record and a note-taking methodology, which, while it would not follow the students, would allow us to track that information. Those are all now, if ever recorded or requested, part of a record. And that record could then be used and public. And so what we have already begun a dialogue about administratively as we think about what a one-year, next-year contract would look like, I don't like that I don't have that information and that we had to make a couple of data requests to try to figure that out. And we're trying to find that spot where we can have the information for sure, but then it cannot be connected to students so that we don't put policing in that student's record. And I assume that Drs. Clarkson and Daniels, as they coordinate and as we continue to coordinate, we're going to be working with colleague districts to see what they do in those cases. My belief, honestly, is that most districts just put it in the file of the student. That you refer to police and you just document. Because from an overall above board perspective, that is the cleanest way, even though I would not necessarily suggest that is the best way for the student way to do that. But we are certainly open to looking for creative ways that people do that.
That's really helpful context. Thank you. I can pass to Chair Brecky.
And again, I feel like I'm going to make a little bit of a mess of things with thoughts all over the place. So just manage your expectations accordingly. Because I do have thoughts on the revisions of the contract for 1 year. And I have thoughts on just the broader conversations that we have been having and I think need to continue to have. And so we'll just start by saying that I too am sitting in the discomfort with some of the results that we have seen in terms of citations by race, and not knowing if there were other students who could have been cited but were not. That to me is one of the difficult questions with this. I think what you were just talking about with respect to records and not wanting police citation to be put in academic records is in many ways a superficial distinction, because if they are getting a citation, they are then part of the system moving forward, whether or not it's reflected in their academic record. And so I think we're still participating in that by having that citation be something that takes place on our grounds in some way, shape, or form. So I felt like that was important for me to share philosophically or theoretically. I also think it's important to just place in context how significantly student opinion has changed in the span of 1 year, from the results of the Minnesota Student Survey to the results that we got this summer, which I think, again, puts all the more importance on the work that I think we're saying we support taking place this coming school year to really have a student-centered process that helps us better understand the lived experiences of our students and what they want to be true as far as their school experience. And that feels especially important to me because we do not have all of the data from the surveys this summer disaggregated in all of the ways that we should, because it was something that we were doing, over the summer, while at the same time trying to figure out how to build a new school system from scratch in the middle of a global pandemic. But really wanting to be able to see what is some of the intersectionality of how our Black male students experience this, for example, how students with disabilities. I mean, I think there are multiple different levels that we want to make sure we're really looking at here as we sit with these questions for the long term. As far as for this coming specific year, the question about weapons has already been raised, so I will move on from that. I think the two things that I feel pretty strongly about, one is getting very clear and direct language around our expectations of what happens in buildings when police are present. And I think that gets a little bit to what you were saying, Steve, about where those judgment lines are, and actually talking through some of those situations in terms of how we as a district would want things to be handled, and making sure that we're actually looking at things through a similar lens. The second thing that feels really important for this year is also, what does an SRO program look like in a virtual schooling model and in a hybrid schooling model, whatever hybrid model we end up coming to actually implement. So I have a lot of questions about what this role looks like in that context and what that means for our students and for us as a district, financially and otherwise, honestly. I would say the last things around just sort of the broader question, I think that this is the responsible path for this year, even though I'm conflicted about it, because we, and this gets to some of what Tim was saying, do not have, I think, what feels like a viable or responsible solution for the long term that would not just potentially be replicating the exact same model, which we have seen from some of our neighboring districts. I don't think that's what we want to do. I think we want to give ourselves the time and space to really think expansively and think big about what our students and what our community deserves, and doing that in deep partnership with our students at the center and with our community involved in a rigorous way that really centers racial equity. So I would say the final summary statement for me, no questions, just thoughts, is I hope what people are hearing is a commitment from us as a district to really be thoughtful and to do the time to get this as right as we can get it, and acknowledging that that is not something that we can do for the 2020-2021 school year. We're going to make some important tweaks, and we are going to give ourselves the time, and we as a school board are going to be deeply involved and hold the superintendent accountable to doing the in-depth work for the future. So I think I would leave it at that. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to respond to me directly before I just do the final. I'll call for any additional board member comments or questions.
Yeah, just kind of two statement comments in relation to that. I would agree that we are definitely culpable in scenarios where we would contact the police, but I do want to be very deliberate in saying there's a very big difference between a police record and a school record, because a school, if a student was going on to college, may judge police presence as something that would disqualify them from getting into college. And so, well, if the police are involved with our students, it does not keep them from a police record if that happened on a ticket, but it would not get in a student record that a college would get. And so I just wanted to make that statement. And the other thing that I have not addressed, or none of us have sort of acknowledged, is that what we are also talking about is the district or administration taking those steps. Every single adult in our building and also students are residents of Richfield, and they have the right and entitlement to call the police or press charges. And so the other thing for us to be aware of is that some of these things, and in some of these cases, may have had nothing to do with an administrator suggesting police should be involved. This could have been a staff member, a parent, or another student. And those are something we'll have to figure out the nuances of as we sort of look to how do we handle this for the next year.
Thank you. Both important points that I hear and take seriously, and I think are appropriate to have shared as well. I will look to see if there are any final board member comments or questions on this topic. Okay, I do not see or hear any. So we are now at the ripe hour of 9:08 p.m. going to move on to the consent agenda containing routine business items. This meeting's consent agenda also includes a number of items that are before us for annual approval, as this is the first meeting of the new fiscal year. So just wanted to call that out. Since this is a routine business item, I won't individually call on board members, but rather just pause to see if there are any questions about the consent agenda. Seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
I will second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Mr. Paulus. Any discussion?
Hearing and seeing none, I will poll the board. Ms. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Paulus?
Aye.
Ms. Misha?
Aye.
The clerk votes aye, and Chair Brockie.
Aye. The consent agenda is approved. We have 4 items of old business before us this evening, all of which are existing board policies that we have begun the process of reviewing and updating. So the first of these is local and out-of-state travel.
All right, so we have a few that are going to go relatively quickly, and then one that might take a touch longer. And so in our second read, local and out-of-state travel, unless Mr. Holge is wanting to tap in, although I just saw him, nope, he's letting me run with it. So what you'll see in our second read is the updated policy based on new updated state guidelines, and then also the new and updated travel reimbursement forms. So if you take just a quick look, you'll see some small changes in regard to reimbursement. A lot of this does have to do with school board travel, of which we frankly do not have a lot within Richfield schools, because we do have practices within our district for pre-approval and things of that nature for any travel that would happen by staff. And then you also see the employee approval form and also the reimbursement form, which works for anybody, including school board members. And so you have that for your perusal tonight. And then we'll take any other feedback, since it has been brought up to speed, which you can provide now or on email before we do our final or third read at our next meeting.
Great, thank you. We will do the round of board member comments and questions, starting with Paula. She's on mute, but I think I can read lips and said she didn't have any comments or questions. Is that right? Just nod if I, yep, okay. We're gonna move on to Christine.
Craig, your thing didn't work, or I must have pressed a different letter other than D, but.
No comments or questions from me either, so we will go to Mr. Paulus.
Just my one question is on school board travel and that it's approved or within the budget. I think I saw it was to be reviewed by the superintendent or designee. I would suggest that we further have it be part of a explicit in a consent agenda or something, so that it was public, so that if one of us went on something that a trip that was meaningful to the work, but someone else might accuse it of being frivolous, we were at least public about what that trip was, that it took place, and what the reimbursement was. I don't know where that would go, but I think we should be explicit about funds spent on the board for travel on behalf of the district, especially since the board, especially if it's being approved by staff and not necessarily the board directly.
Got it. So as our note takers are taking notes, what you would like to see is us add a public report or putting this within a consent agenda so it is at least shared publicly for any board travel that might occur.
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
So if I can jump in just with a comment, the way it reads right now is it looks like regional meetings or NSBA meetings are assumed to be approved, and all other meetings would need to be approved by the school board. It's letter A under the appropriate travel.
Okay. And that, I'm sorry, can you point to where that is in the?
So it's policy 411. It's in the it's in the revised version.
Yep.
Item 3, letter A, that specifically talks about how the school board is approved.
Okay.
And then B is employee travel expenses. And C is specific to travel outside the U.S. But the last 2 sentences on that address what is generally approved as those school board conferences. And any other travel would be approved by the school board as a whole.
And so I think still, since if the board can travel and sort of with this pre-approved policy of what it is, I think we owe a report on how much the expense was if it's above some threshold. You know, for example, we've all gone to MSBA meetings and maybe submitted mileage. That's about it. But I just, again, since there must be a threshold where, or perhaps we could find a threshold where it would make where travel, maybe if it was out of state or something, or required overnight stay, was something we reported back, because right now we have this blanket allowance for certain types of meetings, and the approval of it is through the superintendent and or designee, which creates, I think, it could put unease on the superintendent or designee if the board were traveling in a way within a certain guideline and the trip was expensive. So I don't know what the threshold is. I'm open to suggestions, but I understand the idea that there's this sort of blanket allowance for certain types of meetings, and others would require pre-approval. But if I went to a regional or national meeting, that meets the guideline, and that could be in a great place that maybe is we'd want to know what the expenses are, I think, and report them back. So I could be alone on that. This is open to discussion.
So
the part that you'd revise if you looked at that.
Well, I think we add to 3A just a statement around some form of, so travel in 3A, it says travel to other meetings for reimbursement, the school district should be pre-approved by the school board. And then we should just add something about the amount in regard to travel and have it be publicly. So we'll talk about that offline afterwards.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. Chair Brackey.
Thanks, Allegra.
I don't have any questions either. So we'll just pause to see if there's anything else that anyone would like to share. Not seeing any, we will go on to the second policy under old business, which is petty cash.
All right, so again, small red line changes, bringing them up to speed. The main component is adding a statement called purchases in violation of district policies and guidelines and or not authorized by Minnesota state laws. And so that is added in a couple of places, and then some of the wordier parts are removed. a statement how we oversee petty cash in those funds and also within community ed. And so this just sort of updates those components. Nothing major, but brings them up to speed.
Thank you. Paula. You're hitting the wrong key again. It's okay. Control D. I'll come back to you in a minute. We'll go to Christine.
I have no questions or comments. Mr. Paulus.
My question is that I noticed that some of the schools, the only schools that are listed now are high school administrative office, high school athletic office, and community ed. And does that match? Like, does that match the current state of the world? Are the other schools operating? You know, if they have a petty fund amount that they're using right now, we would want to have policy match that, unless we want to specifically remove it. So they do not have one?
Correct. We worked hard to reduce the number of petty cash boxes that are in the buildings. The P cards have helped support some of that.
Okay.
So the ones that are listed were cleaned up to the ones that are actually in place.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have nothing else. Ms. Mishek.
No questions from me. Chair Brackey.
No questions for me either. And Paula has confirmed that she does not have any comments or questions as well. So thank you, everyone. We will move on to the third policy, credit card usage.
All right, so again, bringing this up to speed, policy 712, credit card usage with no significant edits, and then guidelines with some edits to bring things up to speed. Just as a reminder, schools have a P card. There are multiple quality controls to make sure that there are multiple sign-offs in regard to that. That does come up on a yearly basis in our audit. And you'll see just some clarifications put in there, like changing accounts payable clerk to finance department, so that it's not following a specific title or a specific person. And so then just putting things in to clarify in this area. So with that, I will pause and go for any questions.
Paula, or you can just mouth no questions and okay. She's good. We're gonna move on to Christine.
No questions or comments. Thank you, Mr. Paulus.
Thank you. Just the same question I had last time I asked it. We say here on 3A9, the cardholder's credit rating is not affected by having a P card. Have we confirmed that? Can we say that with full, complete confidence?
I will confirm their social security numbers are not connected to that credit card. It's a district business account. Okay. So, but I'll confirm again.
That should, okay. So is it important to us to have that within the guideline in the event that somehow these supercomputers that know everything about us connected the two?
I don't believe there's anything essential. I think this, when it was originally drafted, came out of MASBO guidelines and what was put in there, but we can review.
Right. I just hate to have it come back to us that someone said this was flagged on a report. Of course, it's when they're buying a house or something, and it's a problem. And this policy somehow has that. So, okay. Thank you. Ms. Mishek.
No questions. Chair Brad.
No questions for me either, but I appreciated the brief cameo from Christine Malick's mother in the background. Hello, hello, hello. Nice to have you with us. All right. Just pausing to make sure we've got nothing else on this one. We will move to the fourth, and the one that I think the superintendent previewed is likely to have a bit more conversation behind it around student transportation.
Absolutely. So this is the other policy, and just as a reminder, we brought this one up because we knew there might need to be some changes in regard to this school year. And so we will be looking to have a finalized policy, or a temporary finalized policy perhaps at our next meeting. And so I just want to walk through a couple of components. We began examining this policy due to COVID-19 and the possibilities of significantly changed capacities of our buses. Just as a reminder, we have approximately 22 buses that can fit within our bus garage. Right now, we only have 17 bus drivers who are hired for the school year, and we continue to pursue more. So we do not have a huge capacity to add more bus drivers, and we do not have a huge capacity to add more buses. At the same time, as you heard in my earlier presentation, at present, we can fit approximately 23 students per bus based on state guidelines. State guidelines and Minnesota law requires school districts to transport students if they live more than 2 miles from the school and they live within the school district. So I'm going to say that again, because then I'm going to talk about what our actual rules are. So Minnesota state law only requires us to transport students living 2 miles or more from the school, yet also within the school district. As of 1920, Richfield Schools provides a great deal more transportation and busing to our students than would be required by law. At all levels, we have something called hazardous crossings, and students having to go across hazardous crossings, and those are listed in this policy at the moment, are provided transportation. At the elementary level, students living more than 1 mile from their school are also receiving transportation. And so we are providing additional transportation that is current law in our policy in 2 different ways. We are looking at state data, which would suggest somewhere between 10 and 30% of our students will be choosing distance learning. However, when I present on this in 2 weeks, we should have a more realistic estimation of our own students. The other thing to keep in mind, and I'm just going to say it really directly out loud today, we are absolutely going to have to do some kind of changing of start times to start the school year. So we have 30-minute routes at this point, and with cleaning that occurs, we need to absolutely have 40 minutes. So regardless of what happens, we're going to have a small shift of start times of at least 20 minutes in the end for at least some of our schools. Turning to the next page. So the considerations for us to think about. 1, removal of hazardous walk zones. So if we are to look at providing legal transportation, one of the questions for us to look at is removal of hazardous walk zones. That would require us as a district, and we have already had safe routes to schools, planning out where would school patrols go. Our Safe Schools coordinator has looked at all the sites and locations that we would want to provide to make sure that patrols were in those locations to ensure safe crossing. We also need to examine our bus boundaries. At 2 miles, and elementary students are the ones that currently get those additional rules. If we went to 2 miles with no hazardous cross zones, 1,333 of our current students would lose transportation. So I'm going to say that in a more positive way for a second, to say that board policy is providing transportation to 1,333 Richfield students who do not legally, based on the guidelines, meet the qualifications for that requirement. We are providing extraordinary service to our community at present. If we remove hazardous walk zones and cut down to 1.5 miles, 974 students lose transportation. Again, most of these are elementary. And then 1 mile for elementary, 416 students lose transportation. And so that is something for us to know, that any action we take, there will be a set of students who will be losing transportation. Now, those numbers assumptions are based on 100% of our students returning. And so if some are choosing distance, those numbers reduce, but that's where we sit at the moment. Then similarly, as we think about what our start times are going to be for next year, it's going to play out kind of like this. The number of students choosing to come back and the number of students we have to provide transportation is going to dictate when school starts and how many start times we have. Right now, we have what's called 3-tier busing, which means 3 sets of start times in school. Tier 1 is the RDLS STEM, which has 1 start time. Tier 2 is Centennial Sheridan, which has 1 start time. And Tier 3 has the high school and the middle school, which also has 1 start time. If we were to be able to retain those, we already would have to move to 7:40, 8:20, and 9 o'clock, which changes the 2 later start times back because of the added times in regard to cleaning our busing. So you'll see some projections in regard to 3-tier, 4-tier, 5-tier, and 6-tier busing. And so in our survey, we are gathering information about transportation versus start time from some of our families and trying to gather information about what they value more. But for this board to be aware of, the larger service we provide in regard to transportation to the higher number of students means the more start times. If we win in one category, we are going to be losing in another. And so we're trying to find that best fit for the least disruption of start times, yet also providing as much transportation as likely. Then the last thing, as we heard from the governor, is that we should not necessarily anticipate that if elementary kids are in 3 days a week, that high school kids are in 3 days a week. And so as we plan our hybrid model, this is also going to come together at the same time, because we do have some opportunities if younger students attend more often than older, or if some are, depending on the percentages of in-person while others are distance learning, we might have some opportunities in regard to what those start times and what our transportation looks like. So what you're going to see in the policy, starting on page 116, first is you are going to see some additions in regard to what safe routes to schools resources would be used, in regard to crossing guards, in regarding to add a policy or amend a policy to include crossing guards and have them have training, and then some of the work that we would do to provide some of those safe routes to schools. The next component would be around us considering removing all hazardous boundaries. One of the very challenging components, and this is on page 122, you'll see what all of those hazardous crossings are. Most of the assumptions of us being able to provide transportation involves us using crossing guards instead of recognizing hazardous crossings. Just keeping rules as is, there are 416 students that would then need the support of crossing guards and the safe routes to schools components. We have done a couple of other updates in regard to the red line components with how we would address transportation, but what we do not have yet in here is that overall recommendation in regard to what we need to do for bus boundaries and that piece. But I do need board members aware that 2 weeks from now, we will likely be coming back with a recommendation. And so board members, as Ms. Smishik asked, how can board members support, is give some very serious thought to this really challenging situation. No matter what we do, we are going to provide probably lesser service in regard to start times or in regard to the amount of students providing transportation. And we need to really think about how we're going to have to work on this to be successful. This is honestly one of the biggest challenges of the entire process. And a lot of the calculus and the math, maybe Mr. Paulus can help us with this in the end, is figuring out when our hybrid appears, what students go on what day, if we do a staggered day model, or how we stagger days that students are in. It's certainly possible we have, for example, middle school in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and high school in on Tuesday, Thursday, and that can then become one set of busing in that situation. That is just an example, not a decision by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to say that out loud to illustrate. And so those are the things we are working on, and I just wanted to make sure we were having that conversation and board members were fully aware. So I'm going to stop and open it up for any questions.
I have a feeling there will be many. We'll start with Paula.
My mic is on. Thanks, Craig. Yay. I don't have questions, and also I feel bad that I always go first, and then I take away all the pleasure in you all from asking the questions. So I'm going to take this time to say that now that the summer school people left, I realized that Cassandra's here because I hover over her name and I haven't said hello to her and welcome. So hi, Cassandra, it's nice to meet you. And I hope you're enjoying your first meeting. They're not so long usually. So Miss Malek.
Okay, thank you, Paula. I first just want to start by saying my head is just like spinning with the number of wheels turning with this, but I really want to just take a minute to point out where we think about where we were a month ago in our July meeting when we were first contemplating this. And it was it just seemed impossible in my mind. And I think that's what I heard from everybody else. And the team came together, and I think I even predicted that they would come together with some really good and creative ideas to help us figure this out. But the presentation for this is really impressive. There are some really good ideas. It is really complex, but I just want to say thank you to the whole team for putting together such a detailed group of information to help guide us as we figure this out. A couple things I love are the walking bus and the bike train. Those are really great ideas for elementary. And I'd also like to point out, changing start times is kind of a small thing if we're able to get our kids into face-to-face learning. So I think we should be able to adjust reasonably to some variations in start times. The big concern I have as far as making these changes and balancing this is an increase in distance for walking for elementary students, because I feel like 2 miles for elementary students in Minnesota in the winter is a challenge. And if you think about RDLS and STEM students starting at 7:40, it could be dark when they have to leave their house in the winter. So that was kind of the thing that jumped out to me the most through this, was making sure that we are very thoughtful, and maybe be an area that we don't want to bump up is our elementary school walk times. Otherwise, I think it's a lot to think about, and I will probably go through that presentation a few more times before I kind of pull it all together and make some comments about what I might recommend. And I will probably reach out to other people I know with especially elementary kids, but other age kids in the schools right now. And I think that is all I have.
All right, so quick response that I just want to say out loud. So none of us want to expand the walk zones. None of us want to take away hazardous crossings. As evidenced by the board policy and practice, that we are providing transportation way beyond the expectations of the state of Minnesota. And you're right, almost all of those numbers are areas we wouldn't want them to impact, which is our elementary kids. And so we also, and this is not in here because these are part of the core team conversations, are looking at the possibilities of childcare before and after school as needed, so that if people have to drop their kids, we are looking with the state, and we're still waiting on a response about whether we can provide stipends to families for doing their own transportation for the year if they're doing that, and just looking at different ways that we can support this really awkward situation. The thing I'm going to push you on, and the whole board, is to say, I know we don't want to do any of these things, but it is absolutely required that within our policy and the law, we provide legal transportation. And so we're probably, no matter what we do, any sort of adjustment is not what we want to do. And we have to, because this is the most complex component, legally provide within our policy transportation to our kids and families, which means we're probably going to have to cut some form of service in some way, shape, or form.
So I guess what I was saying is I would prioritize the distance for elementary kids over start times.
Yeah.
I'm just giving an idea of my priorities. I definitely don't have the answer to all of this.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I appreciate that. And then we're all going to absolutely have to reflect on this in the coming weeks, because it is a sacrifice of some of the service we believe our kids and families need just to try to have our schools running.
Thanks. Mr. Paulus.
Thank you. I'll start with some of the red line stuff. The school bus driver duties and responsibilities is a lot of red line added in the guideline, 742.1. And what drove is that new MSBA guidance? Is that it is? Okay, great. Then I'll go back to the challenging question, which we've talked about and said this. We knew this was going to come, and that this logistic hurdle that's critical to what we do. And it was when we talked about school start times when we changed them a few years ago. Is how do we get the kids there on time for what we do? And I mean, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get the kids on site safely and as many of them as safely as possible. We won't know how many we have until we hear parent surveys and find out how many are opting out, how many are willing to drive on their own or would list that as their primary view of their own transportation. And so that's going to be an important part of our consideration. We don't have an answer here. If we start talking about high school changes in start time, we start talking about changes in end time for high school. And then we get into students with jobs, students with after school activities to the extent those are allowed. But certainly, if students who work will still probably work if they have a job. And so if we went to the 6-tier model and they started at 11, they don't have time to work if we do the same length school day, even if it's only 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And so there are some real considerations that we're going to run into, and we won't know until we see it. So I look forward to getting some data.
Absolutely. The good thing is, and we're going to get a lot of information from our parents, is the 6-tier is one of those hybrids or the in-person based model while we're still social distancing. And so the more staggered our days are for students, the more likely we are to be able to transport them. And so as you know, doing the math, if 70% of our students don't come, or if 30% of the students don't come, which is sort of the state data, that means we're only working with 70% of our students. And if they're in school every other day, then we're only transporting 35% of our students every other day. And so now we have really reduced that, and we actually have fewer things to worry about with start time. So it's going to be really important hybrid-wise. We hear from our parents and families what their top priorities are. But then again, and this is again saying this out loud, we are 1 point above a case level from the state right now that would have everyday elementary and hybrid secondary. And so we also have to build routes and models because we have to build to transition that we might anticipate elementary every day because that is where the case rate was July 18th or darn close to it.
Right. One of the models, the easiest model for us to figure out transportation is no one's on site. And so we're starting in the 20s. We have to be ready for the 30s. And theoretically, we could be ready for the teens. I don't know if anyone's proposing we need to be ready for the single digits. So,
right. Although, as you point out, the 30s, 40s, and 50s are the easiest from a transportation perspective. It's Craig's headaches are if it drops into the teens or below the teens in some way, shape, or form, and it continues to increase the number and percentage of students that are in school.
That said, if it drops, if we're sitting at 20 and we propose something in the 20s, I guess we could be more restrictive than the state allows. And we could just say that's what it is, and plan on adjusting it in second semester or something like that. I mean, so yes, we could build in all this stuff, but I mean, it moving by one in any one of these reports doesn't mean we have to scuttle the whole plan and roll out a new one. So but flexibility it is important to consider it. So
and I don't anticipate us flopping models by week.
No.
That's not what we're looking for in planning. I think it would take planning and transformation to change from one level to the next.
Yes.
I think what we've talked about at our core planning is we have to be ready to shift to a more restrictive model on a moment's notice. We don't have to be ready to shift to a less restrictive model on a moment's notice.
Right. Yes, I think consistency would be appreciated if we can manage it. And so there it is. I'll pass to Allegra.
One time I was in a brainstorming session where the facilitator said there are no bad ideas. And to test that theory, someone came up with the idea of STUBER, student Uber. So short of us considering that, I have no questions or further comments. Chair Brackey.
Would the STUBER promise to be 6 feet apart from the non-household member while in the STUBER?
Limo STUBER.
Limo STUBER. Windows down, masks on. You can do it.
appreciate the challenge to find the maybe not great idea, but I still believe in the maxim, there are no bad ideas. So I would, just a couple of thoughts. One, I want to appreciate Will, who is our Safe Routes to School coordinator. I am so grateful that we were the recipient of that grant from the state of Minnesota that enabled him to come to our district and do this work at this moment in time. So thank you, Will, and everybody else on the transportation team who is spending a lot of time and hours on this. I think the two things that I guess I'm most sitting with, the reality of us making a decision on August 17th and how short notice that could feel like for a lot of people. And I know that the survey went out today and I was able to briefly peek at it and see that we're asking questions and trying to get people's preferences and acknowledging that none of these are good options. And I'm still really concerned that we could be somewhat radically affecting people's plans by making changes at this point in time, or the financial implications if people feel like we're not comfortable or are not able to provide transportation, but nor can we pay for the cost of district transportation. So I think that issue of how does pay to ride fit into this is something that I would like to know a little bit more about in the coming weeks. And then I think the second thing is just trying to figure out how do we have plans given the fluidity of like we don't know when students, families might decide to actually go back and forth from a virtual option to a hybrid / in-person option, and how to account for that in our system. Because yes, we can ask people to commit to being virtual for 9 weeks, which to be honest is significantly better than what I'm hearing about from a lot of places where they're asking people to commit to a whole year in advance in a way that I find unrealistic. But these are not binding decisions. We can't force or require people to commit and not allow them to change. And so especially how that affects these transportation decisions is something that I'm curious and concerned about.
So first, you are doing a great job of saying out loud why we are spinning in these conversations. So yes, we are trying to get people to commit to distance if that is what they are choosing, and understand that it is just not going to be a blank decision that they can go back and forth on. As you point out, the level to which it's binding, I don't know. Obviously, that provides a challenge. We don't know. We are going to have to do our best. And yes, it might feel late in the game. We are somewhat at the mid-later point. The reality is, and I'll say this out loud also, I had done the math, and you and I were talking on the phone when they were talking. I had done the math based on more recent case data, and so had Craig, and our math was higher than the current case rate from July 18th. And so it is certainly possible that our math is wrong and we don't know their methodology, or it is possible that the case rates are going up. We don't know for sure. And so it would be one thing to make a decision based on July 18th, but that's almost 2 months. And so we wanted to make it as early as we felt was responsible and left that extra week where I don't see us changing. That is going to be hard on the start of school, and that's going to be hard overall. Yes, it is absolutely a challenge in regard to whether or not we're going to be in distance learning or what level we're going to be in. And yep, it is an absolute inconvenience to do it at this time. We have stuck with the philosophical priority of we believe that teachers are essential, classrooms are essential, and having kids in front of teachers to the best extent we possibly can while being safe is what we wanted to try to accomplish. We also wanted to gather as much input as to what our parents and families wanted. We actually I got a text, we have over 250 staff surveys and over 500 parent surveys completed already in the first few hours. And so we are gathering information fast and furious, and our communications team led by Craig and Jennifer is really pushing really hard in this regard. We also have people set to start on the phones tomorrow. And so while we do have some concerns about getting enough information, we know we're not going to have perfect information at the end of this week. We know we're going to have enough information to have a very good best guess. And that's what, just like everybody, we're going to have to go with. And so I echo your concerns. I echo the tough spot that we're in. And yet this is the world we're living in. And we got to try to keep on moving ourselves forward to the best of our abilities. So.
Yeah.
Crystal.
And I think one of the things we don't know is the extent to which boundary changes could or would influence somebody to say, I'm going to choose this hybrid model or I'm going to choose the virtual model. We don't know that. We don't know the different calculations that individuals are going to make, but the best we can do is be open about our constraints and our obligations and help people understand what we're sitting with, why we're sitting with it, and ask them how it affects them. Go ahead, Tim.
On the idea of someone switching from distance to more on site, we do have physical constraints on that, right? We cannot promise such a person that the classroom they want to get into has room, and for older students, the schedule the student is currently holding on a distance learning model might not have a comparable sequence or even a possible one in an on-site model. And so there are real things. I mean, that we're not saying no, but there are challenges to allowing someone to opt in, opt out, whatever phrasing we want to choose for that. Model switching.
Yes, you certainly have an actuary spinning for days on end looking at stuff like this, Tim.
Yep. I got spreadsheets.
Absolutely. And this is why it's, I would say, extra hard, Crystal, which is because we don't know how many of our families are going to say distance learning no matter what. I can't tell you today what the best fit boundary is. I have some guesses, and it might change based on that, but it really matters how many of our families are saying we want distance regardless, because again, if half of our families say distance, our transportation problem becomes a big change from where we were already. And if 90% of our families want in person, then we have to figure out a hybrid that has some different methodologies to it. And so a lot of information is coming this week. It's already probably sitting there on the surveys I have yet to look at. So
thank you. Last call for any additional comments or questions on student transportation.
I just want to add on about the question I asked about summer school. It isn't necessarily transportation, but it's all intertwined. So do we have a plan if one of our students that is hybrid or in-person learning and has symptoms and then is out for 10 days, do we have an option of distance learning for those kids, or can we have something for them so they're not just sitting at home because they can't physically come to the building?
Sorry, I was having trouble with the microphone. So distance learning is the easy part of this. We can shift kids into distance learning relatively easily. One of the things that our academics team and Craig were talking about today was we plan for distance. We make sure we are ready for distance because, again, we have to be ready to change to distance on a moment's notice. We don't have to be ready to change to in-person on a moment's notice. So based on possible COVID outbreak or any of those types of things, we could significantly increase at any point the number of kids in distance and have to be ready to make those transportation.
Okay, thanks.
Seeing and hearing no other comments, we will move into the only item of new business on the agenda, which are generous donations that have been made to the district.
All right, so I'm recommending that the Board of Education accept the following donations with gratitude. The Sunshine Fund received a donation of $100 through Give Minnesota from Emily Stevens of Richfield, so thank you to Emily. Richfield Public Schools General Fund received monthly donations totaling $75 from Give Minnesota since 5/14/20 from Michelle Burnside of Richfield. Thank you, Michelle Burnside. And the RPS General Fund received monthly donations totaling $30 through Give Minnesota since 5/14/20 from Lisa Ferreira of Freehold, New Jersey. So thank you to Lisa.
Great. Do we have a motion to approve the donations?
I move approval of the donations with gratitude.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion?
Seeing and hearing none, I will pull the board. Ms. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Paulus,
Aye.
Ms. Mishek,
Aye.
the clerk votes aye, and Chair Brockie.
Aye. The donations are accepted with deep gratitude. We next move into the advanced planning section of the agenda, which, as regular viewers know, begins with the legislative update. So I'll look to Superintendent Unowski to see if there is anything else to share here, in addition to the very lengthy conversations we've had about fall planning.
As rare, I'm going to be quiet. So I'm going to turn it back to the board.
Are there any other comments specifically about legislative items? Otherwise, we will just move right into the rest of our advanced planning agenda. Okay. Let me see here. I think I missed a step in my notes. We're going to go with time for information or comments from board members to one another. We'll start with Paula.
I have nothing. I'm just glad to be here, spend the last 3 hours with you. And I really mean it, because this could have been really bad. Okay, thank you, Christine.
I have nothing to share. Mr. Paulus.
I am also glad to have spent the last 3 hours in everyone's company, and I have nothing else to add. Ms. Mishek.
That was my first belly laugh in the last 24 hours. So thank you. You didn't hear it because my mic was off. But I cannot top that. Thank you.
Likewise. And I would say, yes, this has been a long meeting and we have covered a lot of really important work and there is so much still to do. So I just want to appreciate the board members, but especially appreciate the staff who are doing this day in and day out. Thank you. We are grateful for you and know that this is an incredible responsibility that is on your shoulders. So thank you.
Can I say thank you to Scott? Because these concurrent viewers things once in a while have been really nice to see. So thank you, Scott.
What Paula is referring to, in case you can't see it, is every once in a while we see how many people are actually watching us. So shout out to the 9 of you who are with us right now. So our next meeting will be on Monday, August 17th at 7 p.m. Please look for additional detail in the next 2 weeks about the logistics of that meeting, as we tentatively plan to have some people together in person, but to continue to offer virtual participation options for board members, staff, and the public. Finally, are there any items that board members would like to request for discussion on an upcoming agenda? If so, please come off mute and share at this time. Okay, Superintendent Unowski, I will, as always, give you an opportunity for any final words.
Just super quickly, obviously, as Paula noted, new secretary to the board and assistant to me, Cassandra Kwam, is joining us tonight, and you will find her in the consent agenda at next board meeting as the official secretary to the board. So that'll be a consent agenda item at your next meeting, and we're excited to have her join our team.
Fantastic. It was quite a meeting to start with. Welcome. We're so excited that you're here. So with that, the final item of business is to adjourn. And since that does not require a full vote, I will officially adjourn the meeting at 9:54 p.m. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you again on August 17th. Good evening.